Good evening. We'd like to call to order the City of Lake Forest School District 67 Board of Education meeting for April 22nd, 2014. Could we have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Anderson?
Present.
Mrs. Fisher?
Here.
Mr. Schuler?
Here.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Here.
Mr. Borkowski?
Here.
Should inform every major decision we make about the education we offer our students. It should also be an essential consideration in making long-range plans about facilities, recruiting new talent, and making long-term capital investments. The mission and vision of our district must be rooted in the 150-year tradition of academic excellence and rigorous preparation for secondary school, which has made the district one of the reasons Lake Forest is such an attractive place to raise a family. Make no mistake, students leaving our district should be ready for any secondary education program in the world. The opportunity we have in updating our vision is to channel our energy, values, financial resources, and outstanding educators in a way that ensures this outcome and more for our students. At the beginning of the year, I asked Beth Clemenson from the board to lead this effort along with Mike Simic. The two of them, along with other board members, parents, community members, teachers, and administrators, have logged an amazing number of hours reaching out to the entire Lake Forest community and then thinking about how the input from all of our constituencies could be channeled into a workable vision for the district. Needless to say, this wasn't an easy task, and they've done an outstanding work, which they will be reporting on this evening. The second major area of emphasis for this year was oversight. In this area, I'm very proud of the work done by our Finance Committee, chaired by Rick Schuler, the Policy Committee, chaired by Mike Borkowski, and the recently created Compensation Committee, chaired by Rob Lemke. They, along with other committee members and our community representatives, have worked incredibly hard to ensure that taxpayer funds are well looked after, that the board has policies which enable it to effectively govern the district, and that board members are part of the process by which compensation is determined. There's no role for our board more important than financial stewardship. Much of the work in this area takes place in our committee meetings, which are open to the public. District staff spend substantial time preparing for these meetings. Discussions are detailed and wide-ranging. And what you can be sure of is that by the time an important issue reaches a board meeting, it's been undergone detailed discussion and analysis by the staff, board members, and community members who are on each committee. Finally, there will be a report on the World Language Program by Kelly Jackson. As you know, this has been an unusually divisive issue in our district. We've heard in recent months from parents with differing views who've argued passionately in support of their children, their beliefs about public education, and their hopes for elementary education in Lake Forest. The vast majority of communications we've received have been passionate and professional. In all cases, we know the underlying message you're sending is one of concern for your children, our district, and community. We understand. Every single one of us has kids in the district, and we care about it deeply. That's why we're here. The lessons from the past few months are many, but I'd like to focus on two. First, when the district develops an innovative program which captures and inspires the imagination of students and parents, there's virtually unlimited passion and energy which the families involved in this program will devote to protecting it. Secondly, when a group in a public school system feels, rightly or wrongly, that they are treated as second-class citizens, It goes against some very basic beliefs about public education held by parents and educators in our community, and I would expect across our country. It's the intersection of these passionately held ideas that has made this issue so challenging to resolve, but not impossible. Sometimes it is out of the most challenging situations that the best ideas and creative thinking arises. We look forward to hearing the report on world language from Ms. Jackson later this evening. Whether the topic is our community's long-term vision of the district or vital curriculum decisions, it may always be asked why we need to make major changes to an education system which has basically worked well for hundreds of years. If it isn't broke, why fix it? Our world has changed dramatically in the past 200 years, and much of our system of education has been impervious to the change with relatively few consequences. You could attend a lecture today at a prestigious university, and the format and in some subjects the content might not be that different from what you would have heard 100 or 200 years ago. This might not be all bad. Some subjects, particularly in the liberal arts, are timeless, and teaching them is part of passing down important social and intellectual traditions of our society. But in other areas, it is clear at all levels of education that the traditional model is behind the times, but is now rapidly changing. How could the education sector have fallen so far behind the rest of the economy? Here's one thought. The 19th and 20th centuries were defined by the Industrial Revolution, which was largely about making more efficient ways of producing and transporting physical goods. This had a huge impact on manufacturing, agriculture, and most parts of our economy. And if you were an industry that was involved in one of these activities, if you didn't change, you were left behind. That's why, although there's some schools that may look like they did 100 years ago, no factories look like they did 100 years ago. But here's an important point. The defining economic development of our time is no longer the Industrial Revolution, but the Information Revolution. The same transformation we saw in the ability to move and manufacture physical goods is being played out with information. According to Moore's law, the speed of computers doubles every 18 to 24 months, and the way we gather, process, store, and learn information is fundamentally changing. This is important for us because education is an information-based activity. It is therefore at the center, rather than at the periphery, of a fundamental change in our society. Education won't escape the information revolution as easily as it did the industrial one. That is why it's important to focus on the future more than ever at all levels of education. It is essential to understand the way in which education is changing and will evolve in order to ensure we give the best opportunities to our students. If we don't, the district won't be doing its job. Now, in the excitement to innovate, it's very easy to get carried away and forget some of the fundamental strengths of our system. Not everything needs to change. Will brick and mortar schools become obsolete? Of course not. Will every classroom be flipped? No. Will computers somehow replace the magical experience of being in the classroom with a dedicated teacher who captivates and inspires her students? Absolutely not. What we know is that our district has many strengths, most important among them its people, students, parents, community, and resources. As members of the board, our job is to guide the district and help the superintendent marshal these strengths into a grounded, forward-looking, sustainable educational organization. School boards have been doing this for a long time, but there's never been a more important time for this role. That concludes the president's report. The next item on our agenda is the superintendent's report. Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And at the board members' table, they have a Tri-District Professional Day pamphlet, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Fagel to inform us about a really meaningful day that the district spent learning about formative assessment.
When I got out of it last time, it made it spin.
I gotta make it talk to the projector. There you go.
Good evening. So tonight I'm just going to share a short debrief on an annual event in our community, Tri-District Institute Day. And this is a collaboration between our 3 districts. Traditionally, this day is held at Lake Forest High School, being the only venue that can house everyone. And much of the day is spent with departments from the high school, separate discipline content areas, articulating with the grade level teachers or the middle school teachers. We decided to take a slightly different approach this year and try to create a theme that as an entire community we could really focus on and stay focused on for the next several years. So I partnered with Dr. Wilcox from District 67, as well as Kevin Rubenstein, who's the Director of Curriculum and Special Services from Lake Bluff District 65, and we started planning this day, which took place in February. We started planning way back in September. I think by now you've heard us talk a lot about the shift in emphasis from teaching to learning. So instead of coming together and just talking about what we as the adults teach, we wanted to come together and really focus on student learning to set the tone for where we feel the next really at least decade of work is taking us with our 3 districts together. And what inspired our focus on formative assessment was Dr. Wilcox leading a book study in District 67 on a book called Advancing Formative Assessment in Every Classroom. It's by Connie Moss and Sue Brookhart. And so we thought we would try our luck and see if Dr. Brookhart could come and be a guest speaker, and we were lucky enough to be able to have her spend part of the day with us. Her book on formative assessment is laid out in a very user-friendly way, and she identifies 6 essential elements of the formative assessment process. On its surface, formative assessment is identified as being the opposite of summative assessment. So formative assessment is informing instruction. It's happening along the way. Teachers are using the results to inform their instruction and adapt their instruction to meet the needs of the students as identified on the assessment. Summative assessment is at the end. It's the final summation. That's pretty much the general understanding. Dr. Brookhart and Dr. Moss break it down into 6 essential elements that really change it from just that, which I just explained, to a much richer definition of the type of learning experience that we want to see in the classroom. So the 6 essential elements start with, and this again should sound familiar, learning targets, creating shared learning targets for students to identify what it is that they are expected to know and be able to do by the end of a learning experience. And what are the criteria for determining if you got there? So just that simple concept of students saying, where am I going? What's my target? Where am I now? And how can I close that gap between the two is very, very powerful. Feedback that feeds forward. So this notion that whatever type of feedback the student is receiving, whether it's from the teacher, from a peer, from a community member, from an administrator, if it's in written form or it's in oral form, that feedback is feeding their work forward. It's not just something that they accept and then move on, but it's feeding their future work. Students setting their own goals and then assessing themselves along the way. John Hattie's research, he did a compilation, a meta-analysis of hundreds of studies. Where'd Cornelius go? Oh. And he published a book called Visible Learning. Really, really powerful statement in education. It's being now looked at as really today's version of Bloom's taxonomy, this concept of making learning visible. So students setting their own goals and then assessing themselves along the way, making that learning visible to the kids is proven to increase student achievement by a statistically significant amount. Teacher questioning, the way teachers ask questions, planning for questioning, which is something you'll hear a little bit about later tonight in our assessment report, is very important, as well as student engagement in asking questions themselves and teaching students to ask the right questions at the right time in the right context. That's what we're hearing you hear 21st century skills and functioning in the workplace today. It's more about can students and then adults identify where the problems are and ask the right questions, not just simply know the answers. So we put together a day that brought in a national expert and then combined that with our amazing teacher leadership. And that was just absolutely essential as we planned this, that we highlight the expertise in our district. So that created a day, and you have a program in front of you that shows how the day was organized. And everyone came together in the morning for a keynote and then broke out throughout the day into breakout sessions led by teams of administrators and teachers who got together several weeks prior and planned for this day. And they created their sessions on the 6 essential elements of formative assessment. So we did a post survey, and as a result of this was a survey statement amongst the 3 districts. As a result of this day, I'm interested in learning more about the formative assessment process. 56% agreed with that, and 23% strongly agreed. So we felt really positive about that feedback, and that will feed our work forward in planning future days. By and large, the comments on the survey, and we got over 200 results from the 3 districts, was that they really, really enjoyed seeing their colleagues present and learning from each other. That was just head and shoulders. Our speaker did a wonderful job. She was incredibly knowledgeable, but they really loved seeing their peers present and learning from them, and then being able to follow up with them in their buildings, in their district, and across districts as well. Another survey statement asked if participants have a better understanding of how to provide high-quality feedback. And again, we had a 79% agree and strongly agree. Just a few pieces of survey feedback. This was a wonderful session with many great resources to take away. The session was interesting and the presenters were well prepared. I found this time valuable. That last line, I know it seems really simple. I found this time valuable, but I'm sure all of us know those Teacher Institute days where we, looking at a bunch of teachers, where it's just not. Maybe administrators try their best to plan a day, but it's just not valuable. And so for us to hear that theme throughout the feedback was really powerful. We also asked how often people would like the Tri-District Institute Day, and 58% reported that they would like it every year. So that was important as we go forward in our work. We're already planning. The overall message of the day that we delivered at the opening session was that this is not a fad. This is not a hot topic. This is not trendy in education right now. This is shifting the emphasis from teaching to learning. And we're going to continue to use these 6 elements of Sue Brookhart's work in formative assessment and really come back to that language over and over. Our students setting their own goals, our students assessing their progress along the way. And that was a well-received message that this is not just the flavor of the month. We're not going to switch topics. It is about shifting the emphasis from teaching to learning, and formative assessment is more than just an exit slip that we give students as they leave. That's an example, but it's much, much more than that. So our work continues, not only planning next year's Tri-District Institute Day, but you'll hear a little bit more later on a brief assessment update that our work on assessment is ongoing, and it's much more about the formative than it is about the summative.
Lauren, that sounds like a fantastic day, so thank you for your part in putting it together. And you mentioned that you don't want it to be one and done, and there'll be more on it. Can you talk a little bit more concretely about, even over sort of the next 12 months or the next academic year, how does it transfer from the high school auditorium into the classrooms? What does that look like?
Well, 2 different answers. One related to the articulation between the 3 districts. I'm not quite sure what it was like in the past because this is just my first year, but I can say that the administrative teams of all 3 districts are very committed to creating an aligned curriculum K-12. And we actually will set aside time to bring teachers from departments and grade levels and buildings together to commit to those non-negotiable skills, and then commit to how we're going to assess them. That's a massive undertaking, and in order to even start that work, you have to have at the district level a commitment from the superintendents to make that happen. So that, on the tri-district level, that's how that should translate. That work will begin in the next 12 months. It won't be finished. In District 67, there was so much of this type of emphasis going on before the Tri-District Institute Day that it would be unfair for me to say that this sparked kind of a new beginning. I think it affirmed for many of our teachers who were inspired by the book study that this topic isn't going away, that their work is the emphasis of the district. And then for others, it did spark a realization that it's time to make that shift. The nice thing is that our teacher evaluation tool, Charlotte Danielson, is all about, you could take those 6 essential elements and match them. Just slightly different language, but oops, I did it again. You know what this, my computer's going to sleep? It's tired, it's reading my mind.
Whenever it does, it loses sync.
It's like, so it really goes hand in hand with the teacher evaluation framework.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Fagel. A note to make this, to bring formative assessment to your own life is to think about entering a class, and the question when we were in school was, if you knew 60 or 70% of the coursework, you needed to stay there. And then you would tough it out and find ways to hopefully not misbehave because you were not as challenged as before. One of the greatest leaps forward for the industry is the level of sophistication that our teachers have and are developing related to formative assessment. So what do you do if walking in the door, half of your kids know half of the material they're supposed to learn that year? How does that then change how you teach and then how they learn? How do you group them differently? This is one of the most powerful ways, actually, for kids to learn. One of the greatest returns on our instructional investment time is for kids to know first what they know, and then also what they don't know. So the idea of a summative test, which is, think of the final exam when we were kids. There's very, very little learning that goes on from a final exam. You actually experience a lot more learning if you give the kids the final exam on day 1. And then the kids do the exam, and then you go through it. This is what you know, this is what you don't know, and kids being curious creatures, the immediate reaction that they have is, all right, now I want to learn what I need to learn. And I know what that is. So the clarity of that really drives student performance and student interest, and ultimately it drives their success. So the emphasis on formative assessment, as Mrs. Fagel has said, is this isn't a flavor of the week. This is just really sound, meaningful practice. And one of the great things for us is we have such a great learning climate and culture among our staff in District 67. One of the things bears pointing out too is Dr. Wilcox and Mrs. Fagel get ridiculously excited about putting these days together, Tri-District Day and everything else. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like,
Truth
you
be
can't
told,
believe how revved up they
I
are.
did call you on your cell
Yeah.
phone and say,
Yeah,
this is the
call us
best
up.
day
We
ever.
got Dr. Burkhardt. You won't believe it. It's going to be so awesome.
Yeah.
And so
It was a natural high.
And that level of engagement and enthusiasm, I'm sure, is present in other meetings that they're
It was the world's
involved
best
in, too.
tri-district.
So,
Next year will be the next.
the world's best Tri-District
World's
Day in
best tri-district day.
2014.
Yep.
Right? Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Fagel. And that, I'm going to, in the interest of time, that will be the end of the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Simic. The next item on the agenda is public participation. We have a suggestion this evening, barring any pushback from the audience, but we have some important reports this evening, which are next on the agenda, Mission, Vision, Goals report and the World Language Programming report. And if there's not an objection, we might save public participation for after that so that you could respond to those reports if you were interested. That said, if anyone would like to address the board right now before those meetings, they're of course welcome to. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to the next item, which is reports and discussion. And the first report, I slightly lied, there's one before mission, vision, goals, is the assessment report. Mr. Simic.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. We've got some, if the computer begins to wake up over there, we have some two important pieces of information to pass on. One related to really encouraging student growth and achievement and levels of engagement that led to that. And the other one related to the recent feedback that we got on the Mandarin students' achievement. And so instead of just filling airtime here, waiting for the computer to
Okay,
start up,
we're
I'll
ready.
pause.
Good
You do not
evening.
want to have me singing songs and other things up here. So Mrs. Fagel has, one of the things that she's emphasized from the beginning is our assessment reports. We want those to be ongoing rather than a process rather than an event. And so this will begin some really interesting conversation for us on recent student achievement.
Right. So shifting the mindset from summative to formative assessment, traditionally the boards in both districts have received an annual assessment report showing standardized test data. We'd like to shift to giving you more regular, more frequent, more formative updates, and just give you snapshots of different data points throughout the year. The data will come from one of three sources: a standardized assessment, which is our state testing. Our NWEA MAP data is also standardized, that's normed nationally. Local assessments, perhaps a grade level or a middle school course assessment, and then our own classroom assessments. So in our K-4 classrooms, some of the assessments that teachers are using formatively along the way. So tonight I'll highlight two assessments. One was spearheaded by Carolyn Kremis, who's here tonight, our director of the Mandarin Immersion Program, and she implemented a pilot using the ACTFL APPLE. So ACTFL is the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language, and the APPLE assessment is an assessment of performance toward proficiency in language. We randomly selected 13 students in the Mandarin Immersion Program in third grade to participate in this pilot. The goal of this pilot was not to focus on individual results. It was to get a sense for if this assessment is a good assessment to use going forward to measure proficiency for our students. Students took one part of the APPLE, and that was the listening and speaking. It was a computer assessment, so the students who were selected watched two short videos that explained the assessment, and then they took the assessment with computers, headphones, and microphones. The assessment was 20 to 30 minutes, and it involved speaking and listening around topics that are very real world for students. They were asked to participate in role play scenarios, and they were talking about topics that would be very familiar to them, like school, themselves, time, music, places, and activities. The results, which are early indicators of the success of our program, showed that out of the 13 students, 8 scored novice high, 4 scored novice mid, and 1 scored novice low. And just to remind you of the continuum of proficiency assessment, it goes from novice low all the way up through advanced high and then superior. And these results indicate that those 8 students are scoring at the end, not even the end of third grade. They still have 8 weeks, or they had at the time 8 weeks left of instruction in the target language. They're scoring in the same place that our 8th graders would be expected to perform from a FLES, or a foreign language in the elementary school program. Looking back at where Dr. Henriksen and Ms. Kremis predicted students would perform, this is right on target with what we were hoping for. And our students responded well to the test in terms of the length of time, the experience was positive. So we were very encouraged by these results, and we will continue to evaluate and then make a decision if this is an appropriate language proficiency assessment tool. What I want to highlight about that data and then lead into with our next set of data, which is the NWEA math.
Mr.
math
Figel, could you
data.
go back for just
Sure.
a moment, please? The last slide. To put this into context for our audience or our board members, the advanced low, so you look at that and say a novice high, it doesn't look like kids, they're only maybe a third of the way up that chain. To put this into context of how significant a gain this is for our students, advanced low is where students that teach school, so if you are a teacher of foreign language, advanced low is where you begin. And superior is completely native, totally native. But for our kids to be at novice high in third grade,
Not even at the end of third grade.
not even at the end of third
Beginning the
grade.
program in first grade, so
Right.
2+ years.
And so, I mean, it's a really ringing endorsement for the hard work that our staff has done with the kids and for the quality of the program. And to have kids place where we had hoped them to be placing is a really encouraging sign. So I don't want you to look at this chart and say, wow, the kids didn't make it very far. When you know enough foreign language to teach in school, you're doing okay, and the kids are on their way there.
Absolutely. So with regard to that data and then the data that Dr. Wilcox will share next, you've heard Mr. Simic talk about leading and lagging indicators. And what the leading indicators tell us is what we value the most. What matters most? What are we looking for? And what we're looking for is student engagement. We're looking for those 6 essential elements of formative assessment that transform that classroom from a teacher-directed experience to a student-focused experience. And the leading indicators in the Mandarin classroom are high levels of engagement. I've been fortunate enough to be in the classroom a few times. There are people in this room who either teach in the classroom or who have spent hours upon hours in the classroom. And our parents of students in the program will also tell us and have told us how engaging and student-centered the experience is. The lagging indicator is what follows from that, and the language proficiency is following. We focus on the leading indicator, we invest in the leading indicator, and then the lagging indicator comes along. Dr. Wilcox is going to talk about our leading indicator in math, and then you'll see the lagging indicator.
Okay.
When
Good
you're
evening.
ready, I'll start.
Okay. Like Lauren said, leading indicator, lagging indicator for us, and we have several teachers in the room that teach math, Bridges Math. Student engagement is something that we've really seen. There's been a change in the math classrooms. I've heard about this in different ways from different people, but I see teachers nodding their heads, listening. I mean, what the kids are producing, the conversations that are happening in math, the deep understanding that's coming from this program, I think has surprised and really pleased every teacher that's invested in Bridges. It hasn't been an easy year for the classroom teachers. I have to give them a whole lot of credit for the time and energy that they put into learning this very complex curriculum. The district invested a lot of time in bringing in, we brought in an expert so that they could spend half days planning and get that job embedded professional development. And on their own, they've spent time planning as teams, as individuals, really looking at student data, this formative piece. It's really very much embedded throughout the Bridges program. They're constantly getting data on their kids and then able to adjust and support those kids throughout the program. It's new. It's new for parents, it's new for teachers, and it's new for kids. So you wouldn't necessarily expect us to have significant results after our first year, but we do. So I'll show those in just a minute. And those really are the leading indicator is the fact that the teachers and the kids are already so invested in this program and so excited about math. But what is Bridges? We plan to have, at some point, hopefully in the near future, some kids come and do some demonstrations for you, because that would be the most powerful way for you to really see what this looks like. But in the meantime, on the Math Learning Center, they do have some videos of not our kids, but other kids participating in a Bridges experience. So this would be similar to what you would see in a Bridges classroom in our district. We'll do the third video. So you can just look at how this might be different than what Lauren talked about, the focus on learning versus the focus on teaching. Sorry, I forgot to tell you there was audio. Sorry. It's okay, we'll take them out for dinner another time.
Great. So I'm seeing this combination. I'm seeing people putting up 5+2. Can someone show me a different combination, a different way to make 7? I'm watching your fingers. Ha, ha, ha. I'm seeing this. I'm seeing 4 plus 3. Are there other ways to make 7?
Yes.
Yes, there are. And we're going to be looking at all of those today. I have a bag here. I have a bag for each of you. And in the bag are some what are these?
Tiles.
Yeah, these are tiles, okay? Because I mixed up the tiles. I've got 10 and 10, and I'm going to pull out only 7. Who thinks, Christina, what do you think I'll get?
7.
I'll get 7, but what color?
Green.
Okay, you think I'll get 7 greens? Okay, could I get 7 greens?
Yeah.
I could. So maybe I will get 7 greens, and how many yellows would I get?
0.
Yeah, I wouldn't be getting any because I'm only pulling out 7 tiles. 2 yellows and 5 greens. What else could I possibly get?
You can get 6 greens
6 greens, okay.
and 1 yellow.
Is that true? Would that make 7?
Yes.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to make 7. And you may take your bag and paper and get to work. Okay, and I'm looking at Carlos. And I'm looking at Evelyn.
What if there were a tie? Okay. Tab. Tab. Surprise on my paper. What you make this up? Can you still work?
Yeah, you can still work. Okay. Have you got a tab yet? Here you go, Russ. Yeah.
I got yellow all the way up
Okay.
now.
Did you get a tab yet?
I got
You got. Okay, you did. Okay.
I got 7. This is my 3rd place winner.
Okay. Okay. You know what?
Okay, so now they're going to talk about the graph that they created. So if you think about, with our primary students, the traditional way to learn kids, or to teach kids math facts would be just sort of, we often refer to that as skill and drill. Maybe it was flashcards, maybe it was a worksheet. In this example, these kids are actually constructing number. They themselves they're thinking about ways to deconstruct and construct the number 7. And they're building it lots of different ways. That's a huge piece of bridges. There's not just one way to get an answer. There's lots of ways to get an answer. And when you move shapes and manipulate things and build, you're actually forming really important connections in your brain and building a very solid foundation on which you will be able to learn more advanced math. So this is a very simplistic example, but the point is to show you that the kids are engaged, they are having conversations, and it's not just the teacher's not telling them, this is how you make 7. The kids are figuring it out themselves and actively exploring with manipulatives, and now they're going to graph and they're going to talk without using the word, they're going to talk about probability. So a lot of this math is building the foundation for more advanced math. So it is very impressive, but So if this is our leading indicator, let's see what a lagging indicator can look like for our second, third, and fourth graders who've been using Bridges across the board in all 3 buildings. So we are not quite done with our MAP testing, but we are almost done. We're just doing some makeup. So what I did yesterday was I pulled the preliminary data. This, unfortunately, we don't have the color-coded quadrants, but this is data that we used fall to fall. So we had conversations during our bigger assessment report about MAP and how much the district has been using MAP, and it hasn't been the past couple years, it hasn't been a data point that has been talked about too much because MAP was in transition. They were moving to a Common Core aligned version, so it wasn't a data point that was talked about too much. But now that MAP is 100% Common Core aligned and our curriculum, Bridges, is Common Core aligned, it makes sense to just look at this data and see if we can look for some trends and look for where we're improving. Jeff's term, Northeast, the quadrant that's in the Northeast, if this was on an NWEA dynamic report, would be bright green. That's where you want the bulk of your kids. What that means is for our kids that are in that green quadrant, they are proficient and they are growing. So MAP, this system, which is nationally normed, it sets growth targets for kids that you can look at in 3 different ways. You can look at the data spring to spring, you can look at it fall to fall, or you can look at it fall to spring. So this was the data that we looked at in the fall before we started the Bridges program. So we had 48% of kids that were proficient and growing in math in 2nd through 4th grade. We had 36% of kids, and this is something that can happen with some regularity in districts like Lake Forest, they do fine. They're proficient, but they're not growing as much as they could if they were highly engaged. So that's a key piece. Again, they're doing okay on a test like the ISAT. They're probably going to meet, which is an on-level test, but they're not necessarily going as far as they could go if they were highly engaged. The bottom 2 quadrants, particularly the one on the bottom left, is a place where we don't want to see kids, because what it means if you're in that quadrant for any extended period of time, when we've tested you, you're not at a level of proficiency and you're not growing as much as you could. So we really try to get kids out of that quadrant, and those are the ones that are on watch, and we try to intervene and move them out. The quadrant in the bottom right, it's not a great quadrant, but it's not a terrible quadrant. They're not proficient, but they're growing. So we're doing something right to move them along. Okay, so this is the data we started with. This was our, and we wanted to see what happened when we looked at the fall to spring data.
Lori, before you go on, just
Sure.
to clarify this for me, using the upper left, which
Yep.
is negative growth, doesn't actually mean negative growth. It simply means that they didn't achieve the growth target?
Yeah, it means from with the nationally normed data that NWA puts out, they, based on where a student comes in at a particular grade level, they have a projected growth target for that child. And so these are kids that did not grow as much as kids like them. So for instance, if you have a 210 and they predict that you should be able to, over the course of the year, if you're highly engaged and involved in a strong curriculum, barring unforeseen circumstances, you should be able to get to this other point. So those kids, now they're doing fine, but they didn't get to the mark that was established for them. Okay? All right, so that's the fall to fall data. So we were hoping to move this somewhat, not expecting dramatic results. This is the first year. Often when you start something new, you can have an implementation dip, but credit to these teachers and to the kids and the family. For everything everyone did, the stars aligned and our data is pretty spectacular. Okay, so we went to 67% proficient and growing. I mean, that is to look at that quadrant first, to go from where we were to, that means, now we have on the left quadrant, we have less kids that are proficient and not growing and many more that are proficient and growing. So overall, we have 87% of our kids that are proficient, and 67% of those kids are not only proficient, but they're meeting or exceeding their growth target. We also moved the needle this way on the bottom. We have less kids that are in, I think we refer to it as the emergency room. We have 8% that they're not growing as much as we want them to grow, and they're still not at that proficiency mark. But more kids moved right, which means that we still have some that aren't proficient, but more kids are growing. So we're doing some things right to get them up into this. So again, these are early results. This is all 3 schools combined. We still have a few kids that are finishing up makeups. This was the data that was in the system as of yesterday. But just for, again, like Lauren said, we want to give you glimpses of data, and this is a glimpse that should make everybody smile, because hats off to the teachers for all your hard work, because this lagging indicator for all you've done to make your classrooms really engaging is fantastic, and we're thrilled with the results. So thank you for what you've done for the kids. And for parents, I know there have been some questions about Bridges, because it isn't like traditional math, and you're not going to see a lot of packets coming home and maybe things that would be more traditional as far as what math homework used to look like. One of the best ways you can keep your kids thinking about math is to play games with them. So Janice Heigl, who is the consultant that has come in to help us with our Bridges implementation, is coming back one more time. She'll be here next week on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to work with grade level teams for a half day. Just again, fine tuning what we're doing with Bridges, talking about assessment, formative assessment. What do we do to differentiate for kids that are strong? How do we help kids that are struggling? That's what she helps us. And when that grade level team is together for 3 hours, they can do some really great planning on behalf of their students. So one of her nights that she's here, Tuesday, April 29th, she's going to be at Everett School, and we will have Bridges games in Ziploc baggies for any family that comes. We'll show you how to play the games, and you can go home with them and play them with your kids. So and then again, we hope to keep giving the board more information so you get a better handle on this fabulous program. Okay? So that concludes our assessment report, unless there's any other questions.
Do board members have questions?
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic report. Thank you very much. The next report is a report on our Mission, Vision, and Goals project. Ms. Beth Clemenson.
Okay. Wow, I've never been over here before. This is all very exciting.
Can you state your address?
Yes. Well, I'm very excited to be representing the board and bringing you this information. It is the culmination of a lot of months of hard work, and as I'm looking around, I know a lot of you participated actively in this process. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's start at the beginning. Why do we do a project like this? Why do we do a mission and a vision project? Well, first of all, it is the job of your board to do it. In fact, the Illinois Association of School Boards says it is one of the most important things that a school board can do to define the district's purpose. And they define that as our core values, or what we stand for, the mission, why we exist, our vision of where we're going, and then goals, or stating our priorities of how we're going to get there. I also think there is a recognition that we're living in extraordinary times, as Mr. Anderson said in his opening report. You know, education is at the forefront of information revolution, and like all industries, it is rapidly changing and evolving. And one of the things we heard from all of our parents is there is an understanding that while strong academic skills are as important as they've ever been for our kids, they're not the only ones our children will need to be successful in the future. And so we undertook this with that in mind. But the school board, while we do set the mission and vision, we are not the ones that deliver it. And Sir Ken Robinson, one of the leading gurus in education who informed some of our thinking in this process, has a great quote where he says, "School boards have an essential role here to create the right conditions. It's not your job to do it for them. You create the conditions for learning to flourish." And so I hope you'll see those conditions for learning to flourish were a big part of what we were hoping to create. Children flourish, he goes on to say, if conditions for growth are right, if they feel loved, and if teachers are empowered and encouraged to learn, then we will have conditions for growth. Our approach was informed by many sources. First, we started by looking at our enduring beliefs about education in Lake Forest. We are fortunate to have a strong heritage of success in this area, and we wanted to start by understanding what our community expectations were, what our parents felt were priorities and imperatives for this project. And so we engaged with a lot of you via surveys and face-to-face meetings to get a good understanding of that. We also looked at best practices from schools around the country. We've always been fortunate here on the North Shore to be part of a collection of schools that have excellent reputations. But that's changing, and in fact, there's a lot of schools in some kind of unlikely places that are doing a lot of exciting things. They're innovating, and so we wanted to look at areas around the country for inspiration and best practices. As I said, we looked at leading experts in education, folks like Ken Robinson, Tony Wagner at Harvard, Young Zhao, some of these people who have been leading voices in looking at what skills kids will need to be successful in the 21st century. And then, of course, we're very fortunate here in Lake Forest to have local experts in education, our teachers, our administrators who spend a lot of time thinking about what conditions are right for kids to thrive. There were a lot of people that developed or devoted a lot of their time and talents to this process. You can see that they represent all stakeholder groups, the board, the administration, teachers, principals, community, and parents. I want to publicly thank all of these people who devoted a lot of time to a full-day Saturday work session, as well as another evening, really rolling up their sleeves, thinking creatively. A lot of great conversation went in to our day there, and I think everybody played a big role in this, and I hope that all of these people, plus all the people that participated in our online surveys, will see a little bit of themselves in that final product that I'm going to share with you. Input was solicited throughout the process. So before we went into that one-day session, we developed a community survey, and that started with 20 interviews that with principals, teachers, administrators, and the board that our consultant Shani Harmon conducted. Got an understanding of priorities, concerns, and we put that out into a survey and a first question. As you can see, the responses were overwhelming. So many of you participated in that process. And I'm just curious, if you're sitting here as a teacher or a parent, how many of you participated in some way, either online or, great. See, hopefully you'll see a little bit of all of you reflected in that. Coming out of that working session, we developed kind of a straw man of our values and vision, and we took it out to the community. We had community sessions, we went to all of the schools, and we followed up with 3 more open-ended questions to you all, asking for 25 words or less on various topics, and I'll share some of those results. So finally, we are here today with what we're calling a first reading. It's not a formal first reading like we do with our policies, but really a first unveiling, if you will. We're not going to ratify it tonight. We're going to take another month to kind of continue to mull it over, ask you guys if you have any additional feedback, and then hopefully ratify it next month. The engagement forums were very well attended. As you can see, we had folks from the community. We went out to all of the schools, APT. We also had Mr. Simic went to the DPM Student Council and had one of his most fun feedback sessions with 18 students in the Student Council. So let's get into some of the feedback. So this was the first survey question, and as you can see by looking at this list, all of these things are things we would want for our kids, whether it's at the top of the list or the bottom of the list. They're all really important, and those came out of, as I said, Shani Harmon's interviews with people, things that people talked about. We then took it out to the community and said you can only pick 2, kind of forcing your hand to pick your top 2. What was exciting about these results is you can see the top 4 things that were most important to parents we're also most important to our faculty, our teachers. And so we have great alignment among those two groups, which was really great to see. We asked you to how you describe or want to describe their school experience. And we heard things like collaborative, rigorous, problem-focused, relevant, and again, great alignment between our parents and our teachers. As we move to open-ended descriptions, we asked you to describe the ideal day-to-day school experience for students. And you can see balance really rose to the top. And I'd like to just provide some context on that because, balance could mean a lot of things. And for District 67, people talked a lot about kind of educating that whole child. So some quotes. Extraordinary balance, having happy students who are prepared, compassionate, and healthy. Develop the well-rounded and balanced child academically, physically, emotionally. Helping to nurture students that are well-balanced academically, socially, emotionally. Ultimately, we want people to know that we are producing great citizens. So those were some of the things that people said. We want our students to be engaged. We want there to be a healthy environment. What should the core values of our school district be? Very clear, respect and integrity. If you look at those numbers and combined, huge numbers there. And when we asked you to identify an area you'd like to see the district make significant progress in over the next 10 years, technology jumped to the forefront, followed by special education, quality educators, which was something we talked a lot about in our off-site sessions and something we had complete agreement on across all of the stakeholder groups, whether it was the board, teachers, administration, or parents, knowing how important those quality educators are. STEM and academic excellence also rising to the top here. And then if our district could be known for one particular thing 10 years from now, what should it be? And you see academic excellence just leading the top there. And again, just to give you a little context for some of the things that people said, because everybody was so articulate and insightful in how they talked about it. Rigorous classes. In this affluent district where students are taught to be leaders, the education should be at the forefront. When a student says they are from Lake Forest, it should be known that they have received a high-quality education that will serve them well. World-class education, given the resources, talent, and supportive community, we are poised to become a leading district. What will draw people to Lake Forest is this world-class school district, providing educational experiences for children that allow them to receive a gold standard education, all-round amazing education, leaders, humanitarians, artistic, outside-the-box thinkers. So really strong expectations. Parents talked a lot about personalization, high-quality educators, and again, that importance of balance and a whole child focus. So we took all of this and then put it into the mission, vision, and values. Again, the values are those enduring beliefs of our community. Our mission is the essential reason that we exist and shouldn't really change over time. Now, every elementary school could say that their mission is to, educate children and prepare them for high school. But a mission should also be ownable and distinguishable to you as an organization. And so how we do that at District 67 was what we spent a lot of time. Obviously, we want kids to be very well prepared for high school, but the way we do it at 67, we wanted to be ownable to us as a school district. Our vision is that long-term aspiration for what we're going to achieve over the next decade. And then the milestones are some of those goals that we'll be putting in place. So, core values. We believe every child has an incredible capacity to learn, and that the job of educators is to create an environment that maximizes each student's growth, including the willingness to take risks and learn from mistakes. So there's a lot packed in there. Let's take it apart a little bit. First, we believe every child has an incredible capacity to learn. And this notion of every child was very important to our team as we were talking about it. We're not saying some children, we're not saying most children, we're saying every child. And that the job of educators is to create that right environment that allows every child to thrive. And parents came back and said, you know, we want you to help our child take risks, and we want them to look at mistakes as opportunities. And so we wanted to get that into our core values as well. The next one, students thrive when they are actively engaged in solving problems that matter and when we support them socially, emotionally, physically, and intellectually. Again, having that whole child focus. Yes, of course, intellectual growth is vitally important to what we do as a school, but we want to be looking at the whole child and their growth across all aspects. The third one, world-class learning is driven by world-class teachers, and therefore we must attract, develop, and invest in passionate and effective teaching professionals. As one parent said, having the best teachers is most important because the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. And so we wanted to get that out there as a core value, and knowing that we must attract, develop, and retain the very best teaching people. And then respect is the cornerstone for all of our work. We demonstrate this as members of a learning community and operate with high integrity at all time, reflecting our collective values as a community. Our mission, inspired by caring, effective educators and an engaged community, we educate and empower all students to maximize their growth and develop a balanced sense of self, steadfast resiliency, and deep respect for others. So again, there's a lot packed in there. First, getting the importance of the caring and effective educators right out there at the front as part of our core mission. Recognize that we are so fortunate to be living in a highly engaged community. We, of course, want to educate and empower all students to maximize their growth. Further, we want them to have a balanced sense of self. We want them to leave knowing a little bit more about who they are, what they're good at, what their challenges are. We want them to have resiliency. This was something that came through in the parent feedback sessions really strongly. Help my child to be more resilient, to pick themselves up when they fall. And of course, to develop a deep respect for others. Our vision, we want to be a premier learning community that educates without boundaries, where all students cultivate their minds, create meaningful connections, and unleash their passions. Let's unpack this just a little bit. First, that premier learning community. The idea, again, that we are in this together as a community with high-quality premier teachers at the forefront. We're going to educate without boundaries, meaning we want to take down some of those walls or some of those boundaries that maybe can inhibit growth. We want to bring the world to the classroom and the classroom to the world. We want to leverage the many resources that we're fortunate to have in our Lake Forest community. We want to take down boundaries between disciplines, so we're not just studying math or just studying English, but it's interwoven together. We, of course, want students to cultivate their minds. At the same time, we want them to have meaningful connections to the adults in the building, to each other, to work collaboratively. And we want them to feel like school is a place where they can really unleash their passions, that school is a place that understands that they have things that they're really good at and that they can let those talents shine. And so as a tagline, we then end with just learning without boundaries as sort of a shortcut to what we're trying to say. The milestones are probably the aspect that's in the roughest form at this point. These are meant to be more illustrative than anything else. We haven't really gotten together as a board to to fine tune them. But sometimes when you're talking at 50,000 feet about a vision, it's kind of nice to go down to some tangible things. So what might things look like in 10 years? Well, in the area of instruction, we know that we want the majority of the learning to be problem-based, inquiry-based, and to be driven by students' needs and their interests and their passions. We want greater personalization. In fact, every child should have a personal inspiration plan that identifies their learning goals and how they're going to achieve that maximum holistic whole child growth year after year. Assessment tools are going to need to change so that we can ensure achievement across a variety of measures: intellectual growth, student engagement, and the habits of mind. Our talent, we want to attract and retain the highest quality talent, people who are exemplars in the field of learning, and to provide them with the development that they need on an ongoing basis. Our communication should be effective, transparent, proactive, and so that trust partnership continues to grow. And the environment may be completely reimagined. Different learning spaces, different learning places, time, tools, technology are all used differently to enhance the learning experience. So where do we go from here? Well, we're going to put these up on the website, and we'd continue to keep the dialogue going. If you have additional comments, please let us know. The board and the administration will then be creating kind of those near-term milestones for each of those major progress areas. And then the administration, in partnership with the faculty and staff, will create that strategic plan that looks at 1-year, 3-year, and 5-year goals. That's it. Is there any questions?
Do board members have questions? Mr. Burkowski?
I would just say thank you, Beth, for taking such leadership. It's been a great asset to the board.
It's really been a team effort, as you know. Anyone?
Terrific report, Beth. Could I had one question? I mean,
Yeah.
something I was just trying to resolve is, there's a huge interest in the community of having kids who are well balanced and have good sense of sort of who they are. But then when you ask people what they want the district to be known for, it's academic excellence. And that can push people in another direction, just being very focused on, the toughest classes and highest achievement. How do you think about those two things together, and how do you work to try and get both?
I don't think they're as much as odds as they might sound. I think academic excellence is something that's really important to a high-achieving community like Lake Forest. And so I'm not surprised to see that emerge at the top of the list. That said, I think there is a real recognition that we're not just a bunch of test scores. People are more complex than that, and so we want to be looking at whole child growth in a variety of areas. We want to make sure that our kids are socially well-adjusted and emotionally well-adjusted, in addition to being strong students and strong achievers. So. They work together, but I know they sometimes seem like, it's that, I want happy children, happy at Harvard, right? And so we have to kind of balance that out.
Beth, as Mike said, thank you very much for your leadership in this. It's great. Two things. One, I know I brought this up last night at the workshop, and you've brought it up, you touched on it briefly, but I want to reiterate it, and that is, obviously, underlying all of this is a certain financial and fiscal responsibility to the community at large.
Absolutely.
And that we're not looking to achieve a grandiose vision and then triple everybody's taxes in the process. That is kind of inherent as we move forward as our charge as a board. So I want to make sure at least that's out there, that even though it's not in words and in writing per se, that is something that is obviously taken very seriously.
Absolutely, and as we emerge in that strategic plan process, you'll see the financial metrics being part of the conversation as we get into the details underlying it. Part of what you do with a process like that is you put sort of that big, hairy, audacious goal out there and a vision for the future. Then, of course, becomes the hard work in terms of how do you pay for it, how do you do it, what are those short-term and long-term goals that get put into place.
Great.
That's a good point. Go ahead.
No, just one more thing. Relative to communication to the community on this, and the fact that we are seeking and looking at fine-tuning a little bit more, other than just posting it on the district's website, is there going to be some kind of a formal communication that goes out, either a blast, more emails, a letter, or something that allows people to know where to go if they would like to see what we've got, and as well as do any additional fine-tuning?
Yeah, I'll talk to,
It will be all of the above. It'll be a blast. It'll be on Facebook. We'll send it to the newspapers, you know, everything possible. So we'll try to get as much feedback as we did on some of the surveys.
Just to add to what Jeff said, what that really means with the financial responsibility is we have to prioritize, right? And that sort of becomes part of the goals and the strategy. I would add the good news is that most studies show that it's not just a matter of how much money you throw at it, but if we have the right people making the right calls, we won't need to triple our taxes, because it's not, the good news is it's really not a money issue if you do it right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Although more money helps.
In terms of, one of the things that you had mentioned right at the beginning was the really high level of engagement that we had from students, from staff, from parents.
It really was remarkable, and I can't reiterate enough how articulate and thoughtful the responses were from the community. I think all of us as board members were truly inspired by what we read, and it's a challenge to all of us who are shepherding this forward.
And could you talk about how the draft that we came out with at the beginning differed from the final result as a byproduct of all that input?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we started with was our kind of our current best thinking, and what we heard from parents were a couple things. First, you didn't take it far enough, push the envelope a little bit more. The other thing we heard was, you're talking all about what you as a school want to do, but you're not involving the child enough, the student enough. You don't have the student at the center of what you're trying to accomplish. And so when we went back to the drawing board a little bit, we tried to incorporate that. And then other kind of specific things, I think as you got into some of the community engagement sessions, people talking about that resiliency, people talking about the habits of mind, the whole child focus. And so we really tried to dial that up in this final draft.
Great report, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next report is on the World Language Program, and introduce first Mr. Simic.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So one of the things that, make sure that we've got the, all right. So at the end, we missed a quote at the beginning. That's why I'm over here at the end. You can see a little quote. There's supposed to be a little quote up there as well. This is a slide from last month's presentation. So this was one of the things about where do we go from here. So there were a number of things that we committed to at that time, that we planned on meeting with Mandarin immersion teachers and with English teachers and other meetings, and anticipated a phased decision-making process. So that would first address Cherokee and then look at our other elementary buildings as well. And that we would have a recommendation to the board by April 22nd. So this is a series of meetings. So we committed to a number of different meetings, and then we had a series of meetings. So we had 7 options that we began to review. Also in the midst of that, we had a great many conversations about mission, vision, and goals. What do we want to be when we grow up? Where do we want to go? What do we want to do with the resources that we have? What direction do we want to take? Individual building meetings at Sheridan, Everett, Cherokee, and then also meetings with APT, with Mandarin parents, with English parents, and then mixed groups of Mandarin and English parents. And then also, very importantly, staff meetings. And from these things, we learned a great deal. We also learned a lot at the grocery store and on the track field and other places around town as well. So there was one of the things that we mentioned at our last meeting was we hit the pause button on kindergarten because we needed time to think and we needed time to listen. And so we listened and we listened and then we listened some more. And there's some thank yous that I want to extend to a variety of people. First, to our school board for having the confidence to let us go out and listen and be open-ended about that process, which is not an easy thing to do. We also have, as Mrs. Clemenson mentioned, very, very engaged and increasingly informed, very interested parents on this issue. As evidenced in the LASIK committee, I'm constantly astonished, our parents and community members that served on the LASIK committee, how much time and how much effort they put into that and how well versed they are. A special nod to Mrs. Jackson, who is one of the really nice things that we can say at this point, universally, no matter which meeting we were in, people didn't necessarily agree on anything other than they liked Mrs. Jackson really a lot. And that's a terrific thing. From Andy Henriksen and Carolyn Krummas and Lori Wilcox and Lauren Fagel, we got constant, super positive engagement all the way along. We can figure this out. We'll be able to do this. And last but absolutely not least, our teachers are very well represented here tonight, and the teachers, along with Mrs. Jackson, wound up being the catalyst with their honesty, with their hard work, and with their openness to roll up their sleeves and figure things out, led us to a place that, frankly, none of us imagined that we could be. It's a quote from last time. One of the difficulties, obviously, is we have two different groups living in one house, and they're struggling. One of the things that frequently came up was, hey, we have to get rid of this, or we have to vote these people off the island. And there was a willingness from, at times of desperation, to gore somebody else's ox. And one of the things that we needed to keep coming back to was, look, there are always shared interests. And those shared interests, no matter which perspective you are coming from, was that no one wants to have a have and a have-not in the building. Everybody in the building wants to have a great education. Everybody in the building wants to have friends and relationships across the grade. And very importantly, everybody wants to have a unifying experience throughout the building at every grade level and on an ongoing basis. So we had the 7 options, and there was a good deal to dislike about every one of them, as it turns out, and we heard about that. And one of the things that came out, that, and depending on where we went, which one was more or less popular as well, one of the things that came out of that was we really want to spread the pain. And that was not a desirable thing for a variety of different reasons. One of the reasons, because it looked at a particular program that was serving a group of kids and their parents very well as something that was less than positive. And so there's a constant desire, how can we find a way to bring people together under an umbrella where everybody is getting what they want? Also, we were looking at mission and vision and goal work and what kind of solution would fit into that. And I can tell you with a straight face that none of the 7 options that we began with really fit into that mission and vision and goal work. And one of the conversations with our staff that was really productive, one of the comments was, you know what, there's only one thing that we've talked about that fits in with the mission and vision and goal, and it's this last idea that you've come up with that Mrs. Jackson will introduce in just a minute. Another thing that came out of the meetings was no matter which audience I wound up talking to, they were convinced that I was for the other side. And so I was biased always against whoever I was talking to. One of the reasons to do that is a real belief that we have an obligation to represent people that are not in the room and represent them fairly and equitably and introduce the things that they would be saying to the things that we are saying while they're not in the room. Stephen Covey calls that loyalty in others' absence. And that's something I believe in very much. And what wound up coming out was at the end of it, we knew where people were, we knew what they didn't like, and they really didn't like almost everything that we'd put on the table. And at the 11th hour and 59th minute, I think on a napkin or something, on a nightstand in the middle of the night, Mrs. Jackson came up with an option. And I want to thank her for the snappy backgrounds on my slides, because these are not my kind of backgrounds, okay, for starters. This is way too excited and happy for me. But my black and white slides were transposed on these prettier ones. So for that and other things, Mrs. Jackson, I'd like to thank you. So I'd like you to introduce the final option that we have.
Dun, dun, dun. So enter the Inspiration Black. This is the 11th hour idea that Mike has been talking about. Just to give you a little background of Cherokee, and most of you are familiar with that, but we currently have a Mandarin immersion program housed kindergarten through 3rd grade, and it operates under what we call a partner teacher model. So you have a Mandarin teacher and a partner teacher flipping kids, and then English teachers teaching traditional school in English. And this program is great. The kids are learning. We saw earlier through the assessment presentation that the kids are really raising their language proficiency to a level that we haven't seen with just the 4 through 8 program. So it's really exciting to see that taking place in the school. However, there have been some unintended consequences that have gone with the program. First and foremost is this division that Mr. Simic was talking about in the community primarily, and it's difficult when you have a house divided. In addition to that, having the partner teacher model with the separate homerooms, and it causes a division, definitely with planning purposes, because the Mandarin teacher would only teach math, and that would be different, out of sync with the other 2 teachers, as well as the English side of that partnership would only be teaching English language arts, so that, again, there's a little bit of a divide there. They all got along, but a little bit of a divide in the planning process. And then additionally, small cohorts of students have arisen as a result of declining enrollment. And we've seen that in 1st grade and in kindergarten this year. In kindergarten, we have a really small cohort of about 14 kids. So where did this inspiration block come from? As Mr. Simic talked about, we had several ideas on the table. We were talking about all of those. And while those ideas were going on, we still knew that we had to schedule for next year. We had to plan for students moving to 4th grade. We had to talk about what was the content that was going to be taught in Mandarin in 4th grade, and also review how math had gone in 3rd grade, because with the implementation of the Bridges program, there were some changes that had taken place with respect to the need for increased conversation, deeper thinking, and just on the whole, more language-based, more communicative-based of a program. So those conversations were going on simultaneously with the ideas that were being shared in the community. And through a scheduling meeting, we started looking at, okay, so how could we do this differently if we were to teach something different during that Mandarin block of time, or during that Mandarin half of the day, and started looking at science and social studies as a possibility, and looking at blocking those together a little bit differently than they had been done in years past. And after leaving that scheduling meeting, trying to think out of the box with just how the schedule would fit together, started talking in what ifs. So what if we did block those together? And what if the kids in Mandarin were learning more of an integrated science and social studies curriculum, while the kids that are in the traditional English program are also getting something cool with science and social studies and an integrated collaborative approach, where they could be inquiring into questions that they might have over the topics that are being studied. So a lot of what ifs started on a napkin or something like that. And after the initial what ifing, we began sharing ideas with staff and calling it the inspiration block. So students would essentially have a block of time that inspired them and their learning, and they could follow their passions. The first was just an initial sharing it with staff and throwing it out to staff and gathering their input onto what they even thought about the whole idea. Would it even work? And after that, ideas started to generate from staff members and amongst administration as we continued to share this idea. We also had grade level meetings, we had meetings with parents, we had meetings with Mandarin teachers, we had more administrative meetings as well, and continued to bring it back to the staff and review and revise and take input, and slowly the inspiration block started taking shape. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like. Students would be placed across homerooms instead of being placed in programmatic classrooms, if you will. And we would move away from the partner teacher model and have all students in a grade level placed across homerooms. And the inspiration block would be 90-minute block a day is what we're looking at, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in third and fourth grade is where we initiated this conversation. So that's the time that we were isolating for third and fourth grade planning. And then 2 inspiration block options, a language acquisition block and an inquiry-based or STEM-inspired block where students would be going to science. There would be collaboration with social studies, and where they would be following questions related to an integrated content in both areas. So this is a fun graphic, and I included arrows to show you how the students would move. But as you see on the arrow across the bottom, all students would be placed across all classrooms. And then the blue block would represent that time in the day that the kids are in their classroom. The orange block would be that inspiration block of time. And during that inspiration block of time, students would move to the language acquisition block or the inquiry block. And students from each classroom would move to 1 or 2 blocks. So bringing about that unity, and everybody's going to one of the 2 blocks. There's no longer that we're going to one place and you aren't feeling. A little bit about what those blocks actually would entail. So language acquisition block. It would be a 90-minute block of time that's uninterrupted, where students would be able to practice their language skills, learn Chinese language arts, and really attain language functions that are essential to surviving in the target culture. The content itself would be based on an integrated science and social studies approach. So it would be created around thematic units that are based on the standards that we do in science and social studies in the English classroom. They would not be able to go as in depth due to limitations with language, but they would be receiving content that addresses the standards that we are required to teach. The inquiry block would be a period of time where students would go to science, and there would be more collaboration and more co-teaching with the science teacher. A possible unit, to give an example of something that fourth grade does right now, the fourth graders currently are finishing their unit on land and water, and they just finished a unit called See the USA in social studies. So land and water in science and See the USA in social studies. And what they do during the See the USA unit is they travel across the country, and they are in groups, and they do a lot of research, and it ties in. But as part of the land and water tie-in, they could go to various bodies of water or various landforms along their trip. They could really dig a lot deeper into what they were visiting, why those forms came to be, or what is the effect of the water on the environment that surrounds that area or the population of that area, and why did people move or move away from those different areas, and really broaden the study in both science and in social studies. After getting that content, so students need some background knowledge to form questions to study, then there would be a period of time where they would brainstorm for further study. So students would say, hey, I really want to know about, the pollution that happened in a body of water or an oil spill that happened on the coast and how that affected the environment and how did they clean up and what are the processes by which they're helping the animals or whatever the case may be. But they would be generating the questions, and then they would be allowed to dig deeper by using technology, by using space even flexibly. So maybe they need to go to the library and pull some books, or maybe they need to go to the tech lab or grab some iPads and do some research that way. Maybe they need to work with students that are in another class, and so we offer them some different group options. And then they'd also be able to present their learnings to the group in different varieties of methods. So perhaps it's a website, perhaps it's a song or a video or a podcast, or again, integrating technology to do some really neat things and some really neat investigations. So with that outline of the structure, we move into what would our recommendation look like, and we're looking at a two-year phase-in plan. Through all of our conversations, what we talked about was, although some of the things we are doing right now and they've generated some ideas, we do need some time to study and to really make sure that what we're doing fits the needs of the kids developmentally, fits the time that we have in our schedule, and make sure, so we can make sure that we're addressing the standards that we're required to teach and do it well so that our students are still achieving. So we would recommend that in 2014-15, third and fourth grades would have the option of doing the 2 inspiration blocks. So students would either go to the language acquisition block for that period during the day, or the inquiry or STEM-inspired inspiration block. First and second grades, we would continue to study and continue with the current partner model, while students in the English program would receive an inspiration block once a week. So as we start to study and create new ideas for how to integrate different areas, they would be experiencing some inquiry-based learning at least once a week. And then students in kindergarten, students choosing full-day kindergarten would have a choice for a language acquisition block of time or an inquiry or STEM-inspired block of time during their afternoon period. And we're still continuing to develop that plan. We still need to flesh that out a little bit more with kindergarten teachers. So, but we really want to offer that option to kindergartners who are choosing the full day students to build in more challenge and more rigor in their afternoon period. And then all students at the end of kindergarten would make a choice at the end of kindergarten. So then in 2015-16, those kids could choose then to either stay with the block that they chose in kindergarten or go to the other block, and students and families could choose that. So then by the end of 2015-16, we would have inspiration blocks for all. When we planned, we had a full day of planning with staff members last week. And when we started our planning, we began with a list of concerns that we had personally as educators, concerns that we have heard in the community as we started to present some of these ideas, concerns that administrators have had. And we started with that list, and we wanted to make sure that we were addressing those concerns as we started to develop our ideas for the inspiration blocks. And after we did that, we talked about what would the benefits of the inspiration block be, and really they hit upon those concerns. One of the primary concerns that Mr. Simic talked about at the introduction to this report was the house divided. And by placing students across homerooms, you're ensuring a common experience for all students. They're doing their English language arts learning and their math learning together. So those really core subject areas. A second vision, or a second benefit, its alignment with the mission and vision. Mrs. Clemenson even spoke of being inspired during her vision presentation, and this is a way for us to help students find what they're inspired by, to help them find their passions, whether that be language, whether that be more of a science, social studies bent on things. So it really allows for some of that individualization and unique opportunities for all students. The Inspiration Block allows for interdisciplinary study for every child. So as I mentioned before, the language acquisition block would be an integrated science and social studies curriculum. The Inspiration Block for the inquiry block would be inquiry-based learning in an interdisciplinary fashion, so across science and social studies curricula as well. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So, and that's really the direction that we're moving, yes, curricularly. It's really exciting to see, too, as this idea developed, that as teachers were learning more about it and we were talking more about it, we started looking at other places that were doing it as well, and not necessarily calling it an inspiration block, but there are similar things going on across the country in far remote places and also in some of our neighbors. So it's interesting to see how people are starting to look at doing more inquiry-based approaches to learning and interdisciplinary learning, so across different curricula. Another benefit would be that there's a common schedule to facilitate interventions and enrichment. So with our schedule the way that it is currently, with Mandarin Immersion, you have 3 classes essentially. If you have 4 sections in a grade level, you have 3 classes teaching English language arts at one time and teaching math at one time, but there's always one class that's out of sync with that. And so that makes it difficult if you have students that need intervention in this out of sync class, because you can't pull a grade level group from multiple classrooms. You have to schedule it twice, essentially. So you're booking whoever the person is that's doing the intervention doubly. So this schedule frees up the math and the ELA time so we can do more interventions and do them more effectively across a grade level. This also ensures the Bridges math experience in English for every child. As I mentioned before, and I think as Dr. Wilcox also mentioned, Bridges is highly engaging, highly communicative, very in-depth in all areas. And as you saw in the video, even the students are talking about everything that they're doing as they go. And having it in English affords them to get to that deeper level of communication about the math concepts that they're learning. An additional benefit would be co-planning experience for the Mandarin teachers. So what I didn't mention in the description of how the Inspiration Block looked is we would have, depending on numbers, we would have 2 Mandarin teachers teaching, let's say 3rd grade during that Inspiration Block time at the same time. Currently, the Mandarin teachers are an island unto themselves. They teach one grade level. Although they talk to each other and they share ideas about strategies and instruction, they don't necessarily have somebody that's teaching the same thing at the same time with them. So it's a really nice opportunity for some co-planning. And it also affords increased collaboration across the building and across other disciplines, in that the science teacher would be collaborating at an increased level with the classroom teachers, that they would also be collaborating across the language acquisition and the inquiry-based block to share what others are doing, so we can make sure that we're addressing the standards, that we're also collaborating between grade levels as well, because it's important to share what are the successes that we're experiencing if we do a phase-in model at 3rd and 4th grade, and then what can we learn from that at 1st and 2nd grade, and how can we improve upon that for everybody. Again, it eliminates the small cohorts of students. So upon full implementation, students would be placed across across homerooms. So it gets at that friends across grade levels, being able to build relationships throughout your school experience from K through 4. and offers exciting opportunities to all students, which is really a unifying experience for everybody, that everybody has something cool to talk about and own the dinner conversation at home with. So our recommendation would be that we would implement a one-year pilot of a 2-year phase-in plan of the Inspiration Block at Cherokee Elementary School. And you'll see an asterisk there. In order for the Inspiration Block to function effectively, we do need to resolve some instructional disruptions caused by the late arrival and early departure of the shuttle buses. So that would be up to the administrative team to problem solve that issue so that we can get 100% of our minutes in the school day every day for our kids. Do you want to?
We're still making changes on the slide.
So we're still talking about this.
Ran into. Okay. Yeah, we needed to make an adjustment because we had a conflict at another building. So what's next for us? We need to conduct a number of informational meetings with parents. Tomorrow we have Sheridan and Cherokee APT in the morning. We'll also have Inspiration Block overview meetings on the 28th now and Friday the 25th. So we have a morning time and an evening time. We also need to have incoming kindergarten meetings, so Cherokee options. What do those look like with 2 dates for those? The presentation and a written report on the block will be linked to our website. We also have a to-do list for our administrators, so we need to revisit kindergarten enrollment. And as Mrs. Jackson mentioned, we have to address the loss of instructional time due to the shuttle bus. This is a significant issue because what we have right now are students that are arriving after the school day begins and they're leaving before the school day ends. And in and of itself, that doesn't sound like that significant an issue. If you have a child that needs additional support, and we have a lot of kids that need additional support. One kid can't articulate a vowel, another student can't count by fives, whatever that might be. Some of that time to shore up those things come at the beginning or the end. It's disruptive to the school day, and it's particularly difficult when you want to pull a group of kids together to plug holes for them, if you will, as Dr. Wilcox showed us earlier, with the kids having the growth that we saw. One of the ways to do that is to continuously engage kids in different ways. And so we need to look at the shuttle bus so that there is equity among participants in the school. So some folks are getting bused, others are not. There's also a cost and benefit of busing. So at what point do we look at traffic diminishment as a priority? Because the traffic around all of our elementary schools is pretty significant. But there are also costs associated with that, and to what degree should the district be paying for that rather than having parents carpool from different parts of the district? There are also logistical concerns. Hey, if you're going to change the rules for my pickup and drop off of my child, that's a significant thing, particularly for working parents, but not just for particularly for working parents. We also need to make a decision for moving forward. So at what point do we say, for this group, we're going to do one way, but anybody new in the program, we're going to do this, that sort of thing. And finally, we have to address declining enrollment's influence on our foreign language choices, and we need to do that for all buildings. And let me give you an example of what that winds up looking like. So we have far fewer students who are going to select a foreign language because we've got students, we have two factors going on. One is we have a large group of kids that are in a Mandarin program of their own, and we also have smaller cohorts of kids coming through the building. So we're 122 fewer students in kindergarten than we have in 8th grade. And so what you have is a much smaller demand for your classes. Doesn't sound bad. So, okay, you know, the smaller demand, that's a good thing. It means my kid gets more attention. But practically speaking, when you run a school district, what it looks like is we have 2 kids that want this language in 4th grade in this building. We have 4 kids that want that language in a different building, and we have 6 kids that want it in another building. So across the whole elementary school, we have 12 kids that want a given language, for example. So what you're looking at when you're having that language continue is not having it for 4th grade. What you're really committing to is having it for 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th for 12 kids. And also for that, in order to pay for the teacher, what you're looking at is, all right, we don't have a full-time teacher now, we're going to have 4/10 of a teacher. And our ability to have quality, really great teachers that want to go from being full-time to 40% time, those folks are going to go find a full-time job somewhere. So there's a quality issue that enters into it too. So it's not that we don't want to offer everything, we do. It's our ability to make good on quality that winds up really being the struggle. So those are things that we have to, I don't want this to be, the shuttle bus in particular, I want to put it out there and make sure that everybody knows, hey, this is something that we need to look at. It creates problems for kids on the shuttle and not on the shuttle, and we need to try to find the most equitable solution possible for that. And with that, School Board, that ends our world language presentation and recommendation.
Thank you very much. Are there any board members who have questions or comments? Mr. Schuler.
I'd just like to share, first of all, I think this is fantastic. I give you a lot of credit. This is so much better than where we were 4 months ago, 2 months ago, 2 weeks ago. I'd like to share a story. A month ago or so, I had a conversation with Mr. Simic and some fellow board members, and I remember pointing out to you that my big concern and frustration was that going through all this, the LASIK process, I felt that none of the 7 options were at all connected to the other big endeavor we've taken on, which is our mission, vision, and goals. Just none of them. None of them sort of fit in with what we were trying to do. And we were trying to slow down this whole decision process to make it, to allow the mission, vision, and goals endeavor to catch up with the LASIK decision. My concern was it wasn't going to happen, and it really did. I mean, on so many points, the final suggested solution hits it. It's flexible, it's more inclusive, it gives choice to the kids. The teachers, I think, are going to feel much more autonomous and empowered and behind it. I think everybody at Cherokee is going to feel more of the community feeling that we've been looking for, and feel good about themselves and not segregated. It just hits so many of the things that we've figured out through the community and our own meetings that we're looking for. And we weren't there. So kudos to the whole process. It got there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bukowski?
First, a real quick thank you to all the community members here, parents, teachers, staff, and everyone who's here. And all of you have shown a passion for this, and I think that's really fantastic. As Mike Semick said, we heard from numerous people over the past month and months, and the recurring theme was that all the options presented had serious flaws, and dissatisfaction with all those options was really widespread. Many of you said, go back to the drawing board and try harder. I shared my feelings on the topic, and 2 key points for me were, 1, equity for all, meaning we needed a solution that eliminated the have and have-nots, all at Cherokee and throughout the district. And number 2, creating an exceptional educational experience for every single student, not dumbing down things to the lowest common denominator, but rather raising the bar for everyone. So I'm really proud of the administration, the teachers, the staff for taking all of that input, and in my opinion, largely achieving that objective. The inspiration block structure shifts us away from the haves and have-nots, and it rather puts us to the haves and haves. The structure isn't about the lowest common denominator. It's way too early to claim success, but the potential now really exists for an exceptional educational experience for each and every student, and I'm really excited about that. One of the biggest problems we might have under this structure is that we might have parents and students struggling to choose between two great options. And if that's where we end up, we really should all agree to celebrate, because that's a much better problem to have. A few final quick thoughts. Is the solution perfect? No, it's probably not perfect. Can you find problems with it? Yep, you probably can, and there'll probably be valid issues. But I believe the solution is a huge positive step, a step in the right direction, a step consistent with the vision, as Rick just said, the vision of where the school district wants to go. It's a much better place than we've been over the past few years. And I need to keep reminding myself of that as I dive into the details and I try to find the flaws in the structure. And I encourage you to also keep that in mind as well. There may be bumps and bruises as this gets implemented, but it's still a huge positive step forward. Related to that, some people may feel the structure is being rolled out too fast, that we can't possibly get it right in a few months. And other people will want it in all grades at all schools in the fall. And frankly, we've already heard from some of those people on both sides. I applaud the administration not only for the recommendation, but for the timeline they've suggested. The recommendation takes a significant step forward, but it doesn't bite off more than the administration can chew. And the board has drilled the administration on that point. By calling it a one-year pilot with a 2-year phase-in, the one-year pilot's important. That means the board and the community will be receiving periodic updates with another formal vote to occur next year to hopefully expand it. The structure may have unintended consequences that we haven't thought about, but the administration has built in a process which encourages and allows improvements to be made along the way, and a plan for an orderly and disciplined expansion if it proves to be the success we all hope for. Lastly, on a personal note, each of us, whether you're a board member, you're a parent, a teacher, administrator, taxpayer, each of us, I think, looks at these types of decisions through a variety of different lenses. As a board member, I'm supposed to consider how this impacts every single student across the district, as well as the financial implications, to name a few. I also always try to consider how I would feel if I were a parent of a child being impacted by this decision. If my kid was in the middle of it, would I still think it's a great decision? In this case, that's pretty easy for me and pretty personal for me. I have 2 third graders at Cherokee in 3rd grade. They're in the middle of this. I want to tell you, I'm thrilled through that lens. I'm thrilled that my kids might experience this new structure during their final year at Cherokee. I think they will love the inquiry block. I think they'll grow and they'll thrive in it. I think they may discover and unleash the new passions that we talked about in our vision. And my belief is that this chunk of time may well become their favorite time of the day at school, including recess and wellness. I think they may like this better. When a kid's having fun and they don't realize that they're actually learning, if they forget they're even in school, then we know we have something pretty good. And I think the potential for that is here with this. So I thank you all from the community for giving your input, and a special thanks to Mike and Kelly and Lauren and Lori and the Cherokee staff and the entire admin team for continuing to brainstorm and be creative on this. I'm really excited about this solution. I hope you share my feelings with that. Thank you for being here.
Are there any other board members who'd like to comment or have questions on the presentation? Mr. Fulker?
Yeah. I'd like to build on Mike's comments as well. As a current Cherokee parent, I'm very excited about this. As a parent of a 3rd grader who is just going to school, I think this sounds very exciting. And it's a way to eliminate the concept of separate programs running alongside each other. My wife and I did not enroll our son in an English program. We're just sending him to school. And it's nice to see that this allows that labeling to go away. So I'm very excited about that. I do have a couple of questions, though. Kelly, we made a promise 2 months ago as a board to those Mandarin families that we would allow them to continue their Mandarin experience through 4th grade? Are we confident, and have we received feedback that those families feel comfortable that this option satisfies that promise?
We have talked to several parents on both sides of the issue. I think the main thing that we need to consider in this type of structure is that the 90-minute block is uninterrupted time. So it's the quality of the minutes that rather than the quantity of the minutes, and really with that uninterrupted time, you can do some pretty amazing things with language during that time. So I can confidently say we are maintaining a high-level language program and language experience for kids.
Good. Okay, great. The other thing I didn't see on here, and I kind of have a gut feeling that this is a better option versus some of the others relative to this question, but what are the financial implications of this? Is this as cost neutral as historically the program has been, or are there additional costs that we need to be aware of?
Yeah. You want to talk about it? Yeah, why don't you talk about it?
It is a different program than the partial immersion program that we had in place, which was cost neutral. Because of the unique skill set required for the language acquisition inspiration block, you need uniquely qualified teachers, and we're very fortunate to have wonderful Mandarin teachers in our district. So if you think about the structure with the 4 homerooms, tradition in the past, one of those homerooms was the Mandarin teacher. That is no longer the case. So there is some add. However, with the declining enrollment in the lower grades, quite a bit of that balances off. So we're looking tentatively at a 0.5 add FTE for next year. And again, that's 1 year in. We're working on making a more detailed cost rollout plan. But again, because of the inspiration block being language focused, it requires a unique skill set. If this were a model that was successful and was adopted by other schools, it's more than likely that the things that would inspire our students and our teachers might not require a unique skill set that our teachers don't already have. Does that make sense?
So you're saying the added cost is essentially 0.5 full-time headcount?
For next year.
For next year.
0.5 FTE.
Which is, I'm guessing, probably lower than what some of the other options that were on the board would have been.
Yeah.
Substantial. So even though theoretically it's a cost increase over this year, it's still a financial benefit over other options.
Some of the other options. Some of the, the immersion program itself was cost neutral because of the way it was set up, but some of the other options that we were considering were far more expensive than this.
I couldn't speak with authority to this particular one, but I can speak to the considerations of 1 through 7, and the most expensive among them was about $500,000. So you're looking at 10 FTE for that, and so a half. And that's one of the things that, to the degree possible, you want to make it cost neutral, but it's awfully close.
Thank you. Other questions?
I just think there's one thing we probably all want to remind ourselves is that when we try something new and when we innovate, there probably are going to be some hiccups, and I think, Mike, you kind of touched on that. And so I just encourage all of us to, go in with the right mindset that, there's going to be some hiccups along the way, but we're in such a good place, and, through innovation, we make progress moving forward, and just to be patient. And I feel really confident in this solution, and I'm so excited about where we're headed, and I know it's going to be great when we get there.
I would like to echo what Beth said, and Mr. Schuler mentioned that in the past months, even the last 2 weeks, how this has evolved. In the last 24 hours, the progress made on this is phenomenal, and hats off to all of you who have spent so much time on this. It is a great testament to our entire community. None of us gave up. We're all here. We all have the same goals for our children and for our community, and I think together we're going to achieve them, so thank you.
Just quick, when we vote later on the recommendation, based on the slides, it talks about additional fine-tuning that needs to take place. So in a sense, we're voting on allowing the administration to move forward with that fine-tuning, as opposed to, we don't have to come back in 2 months and say, now that you've fine-tuned it, we have to vote on it again, do we? Okay.
Can I add a final note of thank you for not making every adjustment have to come and have another public meeting on that, so wear everybody out. I want to say a special note of thanks to our staff who have come in numbers, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the reason that we're in the place we are today is because one of the things that we've talked about a great deal in the mission vision process was the need to hire great people. And if there's anything that we've done, I mean, there have been a lot of things that we've done that have demonstrated what great people that we have. And I don't know if there's a clearer example than of this. And I mean, they're so smart, they're so dedicated, they're so passionate, they really, really care about what they do. And that flexibility winds up leading to one thing after the next. And I don't want to point out anybody in particular because it's a collective effort, but individually and collectively, I'm just really, really happy to be associated with you. So thanks.
Thank you very much. We now come to public participation. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board on a topic of their choosing? Please come to the podium and state your name and address. Let me just mention briefly also,
Sure.
I'm sorry, I was supposed to say that we ask members of the public to limit their comments to 3 minutes. And as always, the time is being kept by our board clerk, Ms. Eileen Fowler. And you'll hear a noise from her phone, which seems to be different every month at that point. So thank you.
I try to take notes on my phone, but unfortunately, technology does not always work. A quick question for you. I actually just want to say that I'm happy that do you hear me? Okay. I'm happy that we were able to remove all the options from the LASIK committee review, so I'm glad those options are all off the table. However, my child is one of the 14 students that are in the traditional program. She currently has 2 friends in her class, I would say true, real friends. And the division has been very difficult for her. I definitely noticed that first and second grade were not offered the program for next year. So I'd like to ask Kelly and also Michael Simic why the first grade and second graders were not provided the same opportunity.
Okay. In general, during public comment, we ask people to express their views to the board, and
I
things
do
are
think,
taken up
okay, that's
afterwards.
okay. I do think that the board should consider that before you approve this. I think that if it is really for the common benefit of all children, I think that you definitely need to consider that, especially because the school board has created a very difficult situation for these 14 students. So I think that that should definitely be on the table in terms of why that choice was made.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comment. Thank you. Are there other members of the public who would like to comment?
Do you want an address, name and address?
Yes, please.
Laura Collins, 100 Marion. My question about the new program that's being offered is, how do you find those 90 minutes? I'm very unclear on that. So I can't ask you. So who do I ask? But that seems like a big piece that would be helpful to understand.
There are a lot of parts of this that are still not entirely clear to everyone. I think we're learning why we usually do public participation before the presentations. But we're not going to go into that now, but what I'll say is this is a small town. They're sitting right there. You know you'll have a chance to ask those questions in the next day or two. So Yes. And there's an APT meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
If
When you
that's-
work full-time, it's kind of hard to get to all these meetings.
I understand. I do also.
So, thank you.
Thank
But, so that is a definite big interest, and I would
Yes.
love it if there would be some minutes or something where we could learn about these things other than sitting through the 3-hour meetings that I'm really having a hard time making.
I understand
So
that.
thank you for that. If that could be relayed, that would be wonderful. I think the suggestion is really a nice start, and I'm much more appreciative of that than the other options that were on the table at the last meeting I came to. So I am a parent of 2 current Cherokee school children, as Jeff Folker pointed out, traditional school program. And so my concern is that this sounds like a really great, innovative program, but what gives? So what are we giving up? What are they not going to learn versus what a child at Everett or Sharon is learning? And let's make sure that we're thinking through everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments, and I encourage you to engage members of the community here, or of the staff here as well.
Can I say, Bill, those are both very good questions, issues that were discussed. They were brought up and discussed in detail. That issue has been figured out, but I think we need to commit to get it out there so that people can understand it. We
Thank
can't do it right now, but we can commit to getting it out there.
Other members of the public who'd like to address the board? Seeing none. Thank you very much for your comments. They're much appreciated. We now move to reports from board committees. The first being the Education Committee, chaired by Leslie Fisher. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. The Education Committee met Wednesday, April 16th from 8:15 to 10:35 right here at West Campus. And we were joined at our meeting. The major focus of our meeting actually was an update on the STEM program, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics at DPM. And Mr. Polina, the instructor, joined us, and he discussed that STEM is an elective rotation offered in grades 7, 8, and it developed actually out of a former applied technology rotation when Mr. Seiden had retired, who taught that for several years, and other things. I remember when he taught shop. That was a long time ago. While STEM is a 7-week elective, Mr. Polina works with science teachers to enrich the core science instruction across the building. Band, orchestra, and chorus students currently have limited access to the course, which is something the committee discussed, that there's got to be a change. A different unit is taught each week, whether it's app development, coding, video game development, robotics, rocketry, Rube Goldberg machines. That's a whole class project that I really encourage you to really see on Edmodo. Rube Goldberg machines, really, really incredible. Mr. Polina emphasizes the process, not the product. There is engagement, collaboration with friends or otherwise, and he emphasizes to always ask why. Assessment is informal daily, and exit interviews occur at the end of each week in unit. Some STEM students' comments, and they were interviewed via satellite, it forces you to think. We learn, and it is fun. We learn how to cope with failure, and it is hard to try after you fail. Sudhar Krishnaswamy, one of our committee members, commented that it is essential that STEM filters into the broader curriculum, and the group agreed. Ideas discussed are integration, capstone projects, brainstormers perhaps offering STEM courses in summer and or after school for band, orchestra, chorus students. I believe that was by you, Mr. Folker. And the expansion of the program to reach more students. As I said before, it is an elective, so that does not ensure that all of our students will be exposed to this, and we would really like them to be. Along with the STEM update, we talked about a Smart Lab proposal. And Smart Lab is offered by Creative Learning Spaces. Judy Epke spoke to our committee about this at length, and a proposal will be made to the Board of Ed to purchase a Smart Lab for the STEM classroom. Some funding will come from the Spirit. Currently, Northwood Junior High in Highland Park has a STEM lab, and administrators and teachers have visited there. The STEM lab in itself offers 30 different engagements to choose from, the operative word being choice. Judy Epke has offered graciously to arrange for a field trip to Northwood for Board of Education members. I know Mr. Borkowski was interested, and or Education Committee members. Please contact me, any board members, if you are interested in attending a field trip to Northwood Junior High. Throughout the meeting, we also discussed, Mrs. Epke talked with us about the one-to-one access program for 4th grade. We will not be renewing our contract for NEOs, much to the chagrin of many people. We're learning to cope with it. I will say it was a great start. It was a great start. But at this point, they are outdated and replacement pieces are unavailable, etc. Classroom sets of Chromebooks will be purchased to improve keyboarding skills in 4th grade classrooms. These Chromebooks will offer internet access and ease with the transition to DPM, as well as improving the keyboarding skills. Each student will be assigned a Chromebook for the year to use for a variety of subjects and activities across the curriculum and throughout their day. The Chromebook will not be taken home as it is in 5th grade. We also, of course, had a world language update. And we really had a sneak peek at the inspiration block and the thoughts that were going on as far as April 16th, and it was hot off the presses at that time. So it was a great arena in which to vet the ideas from the committee members and from members of the community and some of the administration that was present. Also, there was a discussion on math specialist positions, and the goal is, as far as next year goes, is to have one math specialist per building, much like our reading specialists. We were in agreement that we feel this is long overdue and are looking forward to the potential of having those math specialists in our buildings next year. The NCTM conference update, which was, I believe, the National Consortium of Teachers of Mathematics. So 15 elementary and high school math teachers traveled to New Orleans to attend the conference, along with Lauren, along with Lauren and Lori. And one of the main takeaways was the notion to expose high school math teachers to elementary math learning that will assist them in understanding and providing more effective instruction as the grades advance. The Bridges program, K through 4, is proving to show student growth, and that's great news, as we saw earlier in the presentation this evening. We also decided as a group, and I will touch base with you on this, Mrs. Fowler, the notion was brought up, and I think it's a very, very good recommendation. There is so much change going on, especially as Lauren and Lori and others work through the curriculum and aligning the curriculum, K through 12 really, that we will meet during the summer. So I will touch base with you, and then you can touch base with the committee to see what months or days are readily available during the summer. Thank you very much. Oh. Anyone else? Jeff, Beth, Mike, you were there as well. Anybody want to say anything about the Education Committee? Mr. Simic?
I wanted to find out where that conference was again.
Maybe guy knows a one-time thing.
Thank you very much, Leslie. The next report is the Finance and Operations Committee. Rick Schuler.
Thanks, Bill. The committee met on the morning of March 20th, the usual committee members, along with Elizabeth Hennessy of William Blair. 4 main topics were discussed. None of them clearly as interesting as what we've discussed so far, as you can see from most people leaving already. Jennifer and Alan, you may find it more interesting than most, but admittedly not as exciting. But there were 4 topics discussed. It was a long meeting. The first and most mundane was the issue of paving work to be done at DPM in Sheridan. In a nutshell, it was decided to move forward with a potential plan to partner with the city, the goal being to minimize the cost through the bidding process along with the city. The second big topic was sort of big picture operations. It was discussed that District 67 has not had a material capital improvements plan since 1998 to 2000. At that time, a lot of building improvements were done, which were funded by bond issues totaling about $13 million, all of which is still in place. Some has been refinanced, but all is still in place. From 2009 to 2011, it was pretty much hunker down and conserve funds time when we were in the heart of the recession. At that time, really it was repairs only and no capital expenditures. We are now at the point where we need to devise a new capital improvements plan and budget. Going forward over the next 5 years, I should say Alan and Jennifer are in the midst of that, as we all are. 3 items were identified as known costs. One, about $1.6 million for carpet replacement and asbestos removal. Number 2, life safety code requirements that are coming. The tricky part with this is we don't know exactly what that'll entail or how much it'll cost because it's out of our control. It's driven by a once every 10-year state inspection of the buildings to see what's up to not only what's up to code, but new codes that have come in place over the past 10 years. So really that remains to be seen, and by the end of the spring or summer, what do we think? Alan? End of summer, okay. The third item, facilities upgrades, that's a discretionary item in our control. But as we all know, facilities either enhance or inhibit the educational experience, efficiency, and effectiveness. So we do not take that lightly, and a lot of thought and discussion is going into that. In summary, the aggregate of capital expenditures in our current 5-year budget total just under, excuse me, about $1 million per year, with the caveat that there are holes in that regarding the life safety issues that have not yet been quantified. The goal of facilities improvements is to be consistent with the current, with our current and future trends in education. A lot of discussion was given to what that means. You know, we've talked about it, collaboration and technology and flipped classes. This all translates into what we would like to see our buildings look like. One good example is the cube that was recently completed, which got the kids out of the hallways and enhanced their group meetings and study time. Bottom line, this will all require prioritizing, which we're working on. The third topic was a finance update, primarily looking at the municipal bond market, trends in interest rates, and the exploration of options of refinancing some of the bonds that are in place stemming back to 1998 to 2000. Some of those bonds with par value of about $6.4 million are callable in 2014 and 2015. We will relook at these in September, vote on it in October. Other bonds are prepayable, but only with a make-whole provision. In essence, the defeasance costs associated with refinancing at lower rates make it uneconomical to refinance those. But going back to the series 2004 and 2005 bonds, about $6.4 million par value, these bonds will likely be refinanced at the end of this year and January of next year, resulting in future cost savings of, on a cumulative basis, around $600,000, which is no small change. The exact amount, though, will, of course, depend on interest rates, where they move by the end of the year, and all of this assumes refinancing with a like amount of bonds, a like term, and interest rates being at around 1.6% where they are today for this term versus 4.1%. Essentially, we're taking advantage of moving down the yield curve, shorter term, refinancing with shorter term rates. Again, we can only do that for callable bonds without defeasance costs. Last, borrowings going forward for the capital projects that we will be recommending. I'm not going to get into detail on this. It's too late in the evening, but I will mention that there are defined limits that allow us to borrow up to a certain amount without a referendum. It's essentially based on district debt service, based on the district debt service extension base. It depends on the debt service from the bonds, but looking at where we are and looking at the formula, we probably have capacity for about 6 to 7 million of bonds that we can raise without a referendum. Beyond that, we would have to go to referendum. The responsible thing, or I guess all other things equal, we would like to keep the new bond terms as short as possible. I guess it's more responsible, say 5 to 10 years as opposed to 20-year bonds. On the flip side, the longer the term, the more we can borrow, as basically we spread the payments out. That is all I have, unless somebody that was at the meeting has something to add.
Yeah, I'd ask Rick, Carol seemed to think she was going to get back to us on the paving issue sooner than now, right? Like, where does that stand?
It's not, the timing of it this year with the city isn't going to work, but it's something, it's a goal that we're going to try to work on and align for next year because quite frankly, and we've done a couple projects with the city before, the Everett parking lot, the DPM parking lot, but as we do other schools and coordinate, we get the unit pricing and the benefit of their engineering. But they're on a different fiscal year than we are, so when they let their bids for their projects, we just couldn't make it work out as we talked at that meeting, but we will.
So are we waiting a year to do our work?
No, we'll be doing it on our own. We'll do our own bid this year.
Yeah, I apologize. That's where we started. My recollection was incorrect on that. Ideally, we could piggyback on that, but we're going to kind of see how it goes. Is that right? And shoot for it next year?
Right, we just need to plan a little more in advance. We have a really good relationship with the city, and we've talked over the years about numerous things, about ways of doing a shared service with them. And this was one we talked about this year, but it just didn't line up right. But we will, it's not something we're going to let go just because it didn't line up for this year. So we'll bid it on our own, as we have historically done at times. And then next year we'll try to bid with them.
Thank you very much, Rick. Next is the Policy Committee, Mr. Mike Borkowski.
The Board Policy Committee has not met since our last board meeting. Our hiatus ends though, and we will be meeting in early May. That concludes the, later in the meeting, we're going to have a first reading on the fund balance policy for the second time, but I'll wait until then to discuss that. That concludes the Board Policy Committee report.
Thank you very much. Next is the Compensation Committee, Mr. Rob Lemke.
The Special Committee on Compensation met on Tuesday, April 15th. The meeting commenced at 5 o'clock with Alan Elvis, Bill Anderson, Jen Hermes, myself, and Mike Simic in attendance. The meeting began by having us continue to discuss the criteria for selecting benchmark districts. In addition to imposing criteria on district size, location, and test scores, the committee agreed that a fourth criterion should be included that would be used to provide exceptions to the previous criteria, namely that the group of benchmark districts should include elementary districts that feed into the 5 high school districts that we currently use to benchmark shared service employees. The committee agreed to propose groups of elementary and shared service benchmark districts to the entire board, which has been done. We are now taking feedback from the entire board. The hope is to have the board come to an understanding of benchmark districts, the criteria used to select them, the frequency with which the district will collect data, and the format with which data will be shared with the board by the May meeting in order to facilitate salary discussions then. The meeting adjourned at 6:30. 2 actually, but 6:30.
Thank you for that very concise report. Are there questions or comments from board members?
Could you repeat that, please?
Was that a speed reading course in Nolans that you went to?
It's 9:25.
Yeah. Okay, we now come to liaison reports. The first is the North Suburban Special Education District, Mr. Mike Borkowski.
I'm under some pressure to read fast. The NSSED Governing Board met on April 9th. Highlights of that included the NSSED Policy Committee brought forth a draft of the fund balance policy. I'd asked the District 67 admin team, specifically Alan, to provide input on that policy, and Alan actually had a meeting with a number of other NSSED member district business managers for this purpose. Alan shared his feedback with me, and I brought that feedback to the meeting. That feedback, namely, was that more cost containment alternatives needed to be considered in the fund balance policy. Strangely, a number of my fellow NSSED board members did not even know that their admin folks had met, and our input largely fell on deaf ears. The NSSED admin team, who had previously received the input from both Alan as well as another business manager, also largely ignored the input. Other feedback from other board members included requesting that the formal fund balance projections be provided to member districts on a regular basis. Ultimately, the fund balance policy vote was tabled until next month. I've discussed this with Alan, and he'll be having further discussions with his counterparts from other member districts. Why we as the board care about this, because if NSSED runs out of money, they would immediately look to their member districts to fund the organization, and in theory, we could be on the hook for a significant amount of money. NSSED currently is in fine financial health, but we can't assume that will continue, particularly with a large district dropping out of the co-op. The next item we talked about was the second version of the draft fiscal year 15 budget was presented, and this budget represented some cost-cutting measures and provided a balanced budget. It does not reflect our desire for less upfront costs to the member districts and more pay-as-you-go fees, but rather keeping the structure the same as it's been. This remains a point of frustration for our district, as well as some of our friends to the north and the east. Lastly, we received an update on the NSSED goals, with members of the admin team sharing their progress and accomplishments towards the NSSED goals for the prior school year. In general, NSSED continues to meet or exceed its service-related goals. The next NSSED Governing Board meeting will be on May 14th. That concludes the NSSED Board Liaison Report.
Thank you, Mr. Burkowski. The next item is the Illinois Association of School Boards, Ed Red, Bill Anderson. There is no report this month. The next item is the Curriculum Coordinating Committee, Leslie Fisher.
The Curriculum Coordinating Committee met on April 10th, I believe. And the bulk of the meeting was a presentation by Colleen Brueggemann discussing the English Language Arts pilot materials. And the day had been spent with language arts and social studies, planning on an integrated matter. And we also discussed and got to see some of the online resources and supports available, especially as it relates to English language arts combined with social studies. We got to look at some programs, including History Alive. World language programming was also discussed at the Curriculum Coordinating Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the Spirit of 67 Foundation, Leslie Fisher.
The Spirit of 67 Foundation met on April 8th. The superintendent's report given by Mr. Simic was a report on where we were at as far as language acquisition and our mission and vision. And some of the topics discussed included declining enrollment and the potential of future limitations in language offerings depending upon what students in FLES programs would be selecting in the upcoming year and years to come. The grants report was very, very exciting. $198,000 were granted this year, and Grants Day was on April 9th. And thank you to all of you Spirit contributors. I would also like to promote that on Thursday, May 8th, the home tour is a fantastic event. It's also proven to be the biggest fundraiser throughout the year for the Spirit, so I encourage all of those to attend. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. The next item is the APT, Leslie Fisher.
The APT Executive Board met on April 9th, and the guest speaker was myself. The guest speaker was myself, and President Allison C.K. had asked me to give a presentation of what the life of a Board of Education member in District 67 looks like. So I was able to share with the group, and it was a great experience. Mr. Simic also spoke, and the bulk of his presentation focused on a rough draft of a calendar and how it might or might not align with the Lake Forest High School calendar. And we recognize that high school students in our 115 district, because of IHSA state laws and rules, for the most part, the first week of August, they really need to be back here. And did we say was it 60% of our students at the high school are student athletes? So their summer really is over by the first week of August because they are participating in sport practices, preparing for the upcoming season. They need to report back by then. The idea of wanting to align calendars, I think the APT Executive Board can see. However, the idea of imagining our elementary students rejoining at school the first week of August did not go over very well. However, there might be some room to meet in the middle. No, it wasn't that bad, but there might be some room to meet in the middle, and it was very, very informative, and it was great that the APT Executive Board really gave Mr. Simic some much-needed feedback, and that's why he asked for it. We also discussed, you want to go ahead, Mike?
Yeah, the feedback that I asked for, to be clear, was if you will go to your grave hating this idea, make a fist, and if you love it and you'll climb the mountain to make it happen, make a 5. You have never seen so many fists in your whole life. So, but a little bit earlier, but not maybe that much earlier is possible.
Yes,
So,
maybe. There was actually more support in waiting till after Labor Day to go back to school, but we're not going to do that. And then Ann Whipple updated us on the DPM parking lot issues. For those of you who do not know at this point, there has been much traffic associated with the rec center after school at DPM and parents parking there and waiting for their children to walk over to them. That time of day coincides with Kinder Haven preschoolers being let out of school, dance classes beginning, myriad of sports and other activities, and people in the fitness center at the rec center going in and out, and it's just not a safe environment. So I believe beginning this week, the police will be there and they will be ticketing parents. They gave you a 2-week window, and so hopefully we'll all adhere to that. And we also came up with some ideas that have already been implemented. I know the light at golf has already been changed a little bit in order to try to improve the situation behind DPM. We're also trying to really make the bus look attractive. And finally, Everett, the centennial celebration at Everett is going to be Thursday, April 24th from 5:45 to 7:45. The community is encouraged to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Are there any other liaison reports which board members would like to make at this point? Hearing none. We now move to, what? No, I looked. We now move to action items. The first is approval of policy 420 update, first reading. Mr. Mike Borkowski.
So we did a first reading of this last month, and we had some changes, so we're coming back this month for a first reading again. Section 420 is on the fund balance policy. Before I talk about the changes, I'm going to briefly say I'm really happy with how the process worked, and from a policy committee standpoint, I'm somewhat using this policy as the model for how the process should work. Briefly, an issue was identified. The policy committee worked with the admin to create a pretty good solution in a pretty short amount of time. We presented it to the board last month as a first reading. The board had some questions, gave some input. We went away and really quite efficiently worked with the admin and other board members with the revision, and we're back this month. So, as I said, I'm really happy with that process, and I think in terms of a first reading, that's how it should work. So the general gist of the policy hasn't changed. This is what we talked about last time, the fund balance. We've expanded the range to say 10 to 15%. That gives the administration a little bit more flexibility. If the policy continues, if the fund balance is above or below that, basically a report would come back to the board. The feedback from the board members last time was we needed more definition of what the fund balance is, that it actually is an aggregate fund balance consisting of a number of different funds. We needed more definition as to the calculation, how that is arrived at. I'm not going to read it to you, but Alan was great in putting what the calculation is, the timing of both the calculation and when the report would come. So it's once a year. The business folks at the end of the fiscal year do the calculation, and if the fund balance is out of the range, they would come back to us by the end of September, which effectively is the September board meeting. It gives them enough time to prepare the report and gives us enough time. It's really nice timing because it's a great lead-in into the tax levy season, which is shortly thereafter. And there were also some general improvements as the flow of the words in the last paragraph. So I believe that the policy now works for the administration, for the finance committee, for the policy committee. I'm happy with where we landed, and if there's any input or questions, otherwise we could move to a first reading.
Discussion or comments from board members? Mike, I thank you. I think this has been a real good example of how to develop new policy for the district, which is really important. Hearing no comments, could I have a motion to approve policy 420 update first reading?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Could I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item is approval of the Olson Transportation Renewal. Mr. Albus.
Thank you. We jointly bid our transportation services with districts 115 and 65. 3 years ago, we bid transportation and changed from First Student as the provider to Olson Transportation. The school code allows for a 3-year contract and then up to a 2-year extension of the original contract. After that period, which would be 5 years, then districts, if they desire, can do 1-year annual extensions. At this point in time, so we've done the initial 3 years. We're recommending a 2-year extension. District 115 and District 65 have also approved the extension.
Thank you very much. Are there questions or comments from board members?
Is there much competition in this space?
No. The problem is if you're in the transportation business, the hardest thing for them to do is startup because of finding space for yards and equipment, and there's a lot of investment that goes into it. So where you see activity is when somebody ends up losing a contract, then there tends to be a little domino effect, and people will bid it because this is unusual because the service providers can request a district to bid out the service, and that's typically when it happens. Or you end up getting a service that can be miles away from your district, which can be a real issue in the winter in an inclement weather.
Are there cameras on these buses?
Yes, look at the bottom.
Yes, there are.
It's included.
Cool. Okay.
It's included. And I guess I left out the most important part of the renewal. This is an annual increase of 2.8%. It's a little bit above inflation, but is cited in here. One of the things that we want Olson to do is provide a benefits package so they have stability of employment, because the biggest problems we run into are when people are not there due to illness or they quit and you don't have consistency on the routes.
My question actually was about the cameras as well, less about the bidding, and I'm not sure if this is for you or maybe for building principal. Does the video help? The idea, I remember when we talked about it, it's with behavior and maybe use it in discipline issues. Do we ever, is it helpful? Do we ever use it?
I don't know that Kelly's had the experience since we've been here, but over the years, my experience with them is yes.
Middle school issue maybe when you have situations, you can always look back and see, limited
Do we regularly review kind of the bus utilization in terms of number of students per bus? This is really more of a community observation, but it seems like so many of our buses are more than half empty, and I'm just curious if we review that on an ongoing basis.
When we bid it out, we required a computer routing system, so it takes the students you have. The reason you see half empty buses is because you've got a very limited window in a certain geographic area that you have to cover in a certain time period. Where we get efficiency is by jointly bidding this and having schedules coordinated between District 65, the high school, and us. Olson only services 4 districts. So it's 65, 115, 67, and 109. And so by coordinating those schedules, they utilize the buses more. But when you look at our start times between the high school, the elementaries, the middle school, it's a very limited window to go from a school out into a neighborhood, pick up and get back. And so that's why.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, could I have a motion to approve the Olson Transportation, to renew the Olson Transportation contract?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Could I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson? Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the postage machine RFP. Ms. Hermes.
All right, the highlight of the evening, I'm sure. It's tough to follow these acts, really. Won't go into a lot of detail. This is an expiring lease, basically, to handle all of our mail processing that does run through DPM for all of our sites. We did look at lease and a purchase option, both of which the details are presented in front of you. We are recommending going with NeoPost for a 60-month lease. It's a locked-in cost, all in $8,735, which is less than half of what our last 5-year lease looked like, for very similar processing speeds.
Are there questions or comments or other discussion from board members? Hearing none. Could I have a motion to, thank you, Jennifer. Could I have a motion to approve the postage machine RFP?
So moved.
Second, please.
Second.
Could I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Borkowski?
Yes.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next item is the approval of student fee schedule. Mr. Simic.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And Alan or Jen, do you care to comment on these two?
Just briefly, before the board is a copy of the fee recommendation. For the most part, you can see that our main fees, the material and consumable fees, we're recommending 0 increase. Those fees have been held constant since 08-09 at those existing rates. The only change for next year that we're proposing is actually a slight reduction of $1. There are a few costs that we do at pass-through, so whatever our cost is, that's the charge to parents. So the change for next year is the calculator fee at grade 4 going from $16 to $15 because we were able to acquire it a little bit more inexpensively this year.
What is preschool? I know what preschool is. Let me rephrase that. What does preschool mean in this context?
Sometimes throughout the years, we may have peer students join our early childhood program, which is more of a special education program, but we may have peer students join that program as well. We have not had any in a few years, but we do keep the option open. So if we had space and if it met the needs of the students, you could combine those with some of those like peers.
Did this come through any of the committees?
It did not.
It has historically.
has historically.
And so why didn't it?
After our last marathon finance and ops meeting, we tried to get one on the schedule, but it didn't, it wasn't working out. And so,
So next year, the intention would be it would come through.
yeah, the last several, as Jennifer said, I think since '08, there has been no movement on fees, and the theory is that over time they become less relevant to the overall budget, because as expenses go up as a revenue source of the budget, then they drop. But yes, we can have a discussion on that and bring, normally we would be bringing it to the committee.
This isn't the time to go into great detail, but 2 questions on the transportation costs. One, with rising fuel costs over the last 5 to 6 years, to be able to maintain a constant cost of the bus, I don't quite understand that. But I also would love to, at some point, just to dig a little deeper into those numbers. I've always been flummoxed why, if you've got 2 kids from the same house at the same stop going to the same school, it costs so much more money. So I'd love to, at some point, get a better feel for that.
Well, I will say that I was, maybe Bill was as well, but I was on the finance committee back in 2008, 09 when we increased those fees, and I think it is about time we rethink it.
Well, I'm not saying we raise them necessarily. If it, you know,
We
I'm
might
not
think-
looking to raise the fees, but
That's why I asked before, if the idea was we didn't have to float this past finance because nothing was going up, that's not a good argument, because maybe some fees should go down.
potentially, yeah, I guess that's, yeah.
Okay. To clarify, we are on item D on the agenda, which is approval of student fee schedule. Could I have a motion to approve item D?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
A roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, next is item E, approval of the Everett Tile Abatement Project. Everett School is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, and apparently it is time to replace the tiles which are from the era of Grover Cleveland. So, Mr. Albus.
Not quite that old, but close. I think Mr. Schuler talked a little earlier about the last major capital improvement infusion in the district was Project 2000. And at that time, what was done in all 3 elementary buildings was to install carpet, and that carpet was installed over asbestos tile. And that is a very acceptable way of encapsulating that tile. That was a common practice that was done. The problem with that is now when you go to replace that carpet, which is now 15 years old, that when you pull the carpet up, you also pull up that asbestos tile, and it then can become friable. So it becomes a much bigger project, and we know, I think we estimate about $1.6 million worth of abatement and carpet or tile replacement throughout the district in the coming years. We spent a lot of time at the last finance meeting talking about how we were going to approach that. And what we wanted to do is this year tackle one school, the entire school. And internally, we've talked about, do we do all the schools and do them in sections? How do you eat this elephant? And so we decided to go after one school, and when you stop and think about it, every piece of furniture and equipment has to be moved. A company comes in, does the entire abatement, the areas are sealed, air tests are done, and then they come in afterwards, and in this case, we're going to retile. In front of you are the bid results. Kinzel Contracting was the low bidder at $132,500. There's about $15,000 worth of project management cost, bringing the total to $147,500. We had been carrying in the projection, the capital projects projection, $190,000. That was a number that we had gotten as a budget figure from Camplin and Associates. So we were happy with where these bids came in at. we'd recommend moving forward with this. We're also working, and I hope to bring to you next month, we've had several meetings on some color palettes now then to replace the carpet and the tile. And some of them I think are really exciting and really nice. And we'll be bringing that to you next month. Depending on how Everett goes, then we may want to get more aggressive next year and come back and maybe do the other two elementaries at the same time. The process of doing the abatement itself will take 3 to 4 weeks. And then to install the tile, and then to set the school back up, there's not a lot of margin for error in that. And so that's why we decided to do just one school this year, because if we do have a problem, then all our resources go into resolving that, as opposed to trying to do it throughout the district. But Everett was the one chosen for this year, and again, we'll come back next month with the color palettes and the cost of the tile installation that will go in.
Will there be able to be the Brainstormers summer school program there that typically is housed there?
I'm going to say no, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure where that's being housed. But I think that's been coordinated between Dr. Weimer and Carol.
And will the tile abatement be in the Park District part of the building as well, or just in the?
Just in the school.
Okay, because I think some of the yeah, right, that's what I was. And the $190,000 that's budgeted incorporates the purchase of the tile? That was just for the abatement?
Just for the abatement. So this came in a little under, which is good, because we don't know where the tile replacement will be. And so if that's off a little bit, then it's just moving.
And can we hold Kinsale accountable for not spilling mastic remover? Because I don't want to live through that again.
That makes several of us. You know, the industry's moved away. We went, at Cherokee, we used a citrus-based mastic remover, which was very common. At Deer Path, we went to a soy-based one, and that created different issues, not with odor. And I'm not sure what they're using now, but it has evolved, and there's a lot more confidence in this. In fact, last year, we didn't do any of these, and we did some tests in several rooms to see how the mastic remover performed and if we were comfortable moving forward, and we were.
Have we worked with this company before?
We have not, but as you see in Carol's write-up, what she's saying is based on the recommendation of our environmental consultant. So when we use Camplin in this event, he researches, just as our architect would, on the contractor for the cube, and makes a recommendation as to whether or not they're a responsible bidder.
Alan, just maybe I missed it, but so we use citrus at Cherokee, and then we use soy at Deer Path, and what are we using at Everett?
It escapes me at the moment what the active ingredient is in this mastic remover, but it's not soy, and I'm pretty sure it's not citrus-based.
Okay, thank you. More questions from board members. Could I have a motion to approve the Everett Tile Abatement Project?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Not everyone at once. A roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We are going to deviate slightly from the agenda here because some board members have commitments. We are going to move to item I, which is approval of the mission, vision, goals, first reading. Ms. Clemenson.
I'd like to move that we approve the first reading of the mission, vision, and goals.
I second.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
I think we're going to now do item J, which is approval of a world language proposal. Mr. Simic.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I recommend that the board approve this as presented.
Could I just say
I'd like
that,
a provision that Mrs. Fagel get a little more excited about it. Could that be duly noted for the record, Madam Clerk?
could I ask that the two parents that had questions before, and we didn't take them and respond in public comment, but that we could reach out to them on some level and make sure that their questions are addressed. Are there other questions or comments from board members?
To that point, though, is there a way to, for the public record, help people understand why the recommendation doesn't include first and second grade?
Part of the communication plan that we've been working on will be send information out tomorrow with the video. Cable TV is going to help have us have it bright and early in the morning, and we'll have a Q&A as well that we'll build, and we'll encourage people to send in, and the frequently asked questions we can post and then send out to. So these are two that we took note of tonight. Kelly and I have kind of been emailing back and forth. We're going to add some more, so we'll start building so some of these frequently asked questions can be sent to public.
Excellent.
As well as shared at the meetings that Mr. Simic shared with you, because we have two scheduled for parent evenings and add questions there as well as the kindergarten.
So part of the technical answer of your question, I think Ann just gave, but I'm going to ask our creative magicians, the three of you, Lauren, Lori, Kelly, Elena's issue with 14 kids and her kids in that 14, it's a legitimate issue and it stinks. And I don't know the answer, and obviously there isn't an easy one, but you guys were awesome and creative in coming up with a solution that works in the big picture called the inspiration blocks, to the degree that you guys can huddle and think about that, and maybe there is some other brainstorm, not to expand inspiration blocks to first grade, but to do something to help that cohort. I don't know what that looks like, but whatever we can do, that would be great.
Or, yeah, and can you provide some insight just real quickly why the recommendation doesn't incorporate that?
Sure. The recommendation was as it is to allow for further planning in first and second grade. I think we spoke earlier about if we did it all at once, that's a big undertaking in a short amount of time, and we want to do it well. And be very thoughtful about how we're planning everything. So while that's a great hope and wish, it does not address those 14 kids. If we did build into our plan for next year for those kids in that class to have at least one inspiration block experience a week. So it's more of a taste of the inspiration block, but as we plan, as we continue to collaborate, there may be options for that. One thing to note is that those kids have not been in the same homeroom in kindergarten. So it is a different recombination of students, and although we wouldn't be blending as we did this year in first grade across the homerooms, we would still look at opportunities to do some of that social interaction, social blending. They all will have lunch and recess next year, which is a great place for them to interact, but also through special classes.
And the gender makeup is fairly even, if I remember correctly.
I believe
it's almost
so.
50-50 girls and boys, right?
I'm not sure of the exact numbers.
I think it's pretty close
at this point, but yeah.
And maybe even communicate.
The main concern, and Mike echoed this, almost every place we talked about this, which was many places, was that the idea of this being their experience for 5 years was not palatable. This is 1 year. see a big difference in that.
And possibly just communicating the things you just said, Kelly, to Elena, and that she may not realize the lunch, the recess, the little inspiration block. I mean, those things, they should help a little bit.
Will they
Right,
still
could-
have Mandarin in math? Or are we going to move first and second grade away from for the Mandarin kids? Will they be having, they're just like they are this year, or are they going to move to a science, social studies, language? So for Bridges in first and second grade is more palatable to be taught in Mandarin. So I'm trying to put together an argument for people who are asking why not. It's a combination of resources, being able to develop the curriculum effectively across the entire school, along with the realization that Bridges in first and second grade is not as collaboration language based and therefore can still be effectively. Okay, so keeping it in the current format for those two grades does not in any way hurt the Mandarin kids, and it's easier to implement. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Could I have a motion to approve the world language proposal?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Could I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Nice work. Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is approval of the Deer Path locker replacement bid. Mr. Albus?
As stated in your packet, legal notice was placed in the paper and bids were opened on April 7th of 2014 for the replacement of lockers in the boys and girls locker rooms at Deer Path Middle School. 3 companies bid on the project. There was about a $6,000 spread, $7,000 spread between the bids. The low bidder is Interiors for Business. As stated in the memo, although we have never worked with this vendor, Carol White has checked the references and found them to be considered a reliable and reputable vendor. In the capital projects projection or facility plan, we had estimated this project to be about $88,000. The low bid is $74,350. So we would recommend your consideration and approval.
Thank you, Mr. Albus. Are there questions or comments from board members on the Deer Path locker replacement bid?
Are we required by any law or statute to always go with the lowest bidder?
There are some exemptions. It's a section of the school code is contracts. For example, copiers are exempt from bidding. Goods procurable from only one source, but in general, anything over $25,000 is to be bid, and it is to be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. But in total, there's like 14 or 17 exceptions to that, and I can provide that at some point. But this would not fall under. This would not fall.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, could I have a move to approve the Deer Path locker replacement bid?
So moved.
A second?
Second. Second.
Roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mrs. Clemenson? Oh, she's gone. Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, the next item on the agenda calendar is approval of the 2013-2014 calendar Dr. Hendrickson.
Thank you. So we did have 4 closing days in January due to extreme cold, and these are our recommendations for making them up, one of which we've already done. April 17th had been an institute day. We turned that into a full day of school. So that is how we would come out with the same amount of instructional minutes, ending on Tuesday, June 10th at 11 and 11:30. So a recommendation, if you're ready, to approve the final calendar. Don't think we have any more snow or cold. Knock on wood, right?
So, Andy, I've got a question on behalf of Will Anderson, an 8th grader, which is, what will the 8th graders do after graduation?
As they always do, they are free to go.
Okay. And what day is graduation again?
Oh, gosh. I had that on a previous thing. I can look it up as we
June
talk.
2nd, right? It's a Monday.
It's
June
the same
2nd.
as we had planned. Thank you.
The 8th graders really like this plan.
Yeah, I think they do.
I have a few comments. It's not so much about the calendar going for the rest of the year, because at this point it's too late to change it, and it's not going to make that big of an impact. But for the last few years, I've had some issues with calendar scheduling. The biggest issues I've had, and I think some others have had, and I know community members have had, are half days and late arrival days and early release Mondays and rescheduling snow days or cold days at the end of the year. My goal is to get us as a group to relook at this issue of primarily half days and shortened days. My personal feeling is that no matter what somebody tells me, when kids go for 3 hours or 3.5 hours instead of a full day, they're not getting half a day's education. It doesn't get the momentum. They're getting shortchanged. So I'm looking at it purely from the kids' education and how much education, how many hours are they getting in of effective teaching time. It's inconvenient for parents to have to pick up those that don't have the bus. That's an issue, but it's secondary. I'm looking primarily at the quality number of education hours for our kids. I think it's already short, and that's a whole bigger picture item. I think we don't have enough school days. We have too many broken up weeks where we already have a holiday, but then we have to have a half day before the holiday weekend, like Memorial Day weekend, for instance, coming up. We get Memorial Day off, but why do we need a half day on Friday before that weekend? Or why do we need a half day before any holiday break? If you look back, I think Mike's going to give better detail on this, but if you look back to Thanksgiving, and especially Christmas time through the end of the year, some of it was out of our control, because we had these 4 frozen days where buses didn't work and we couldn't go to school. But there were so many weeks, there were so few weeks with continuous 5 days of schooling. It's disruptive. And then I don't think it's effective moving the makeup days to June 5th, 6th, 9th, 10th. No matter what somebody tells me, I don't think those are going to be effective learning days. I think the kids are checked out. I even think the teachers are going to be checked out. I hear it doesn't have to be that way. I know it doesn't have to be that way, but I'm far from being convinced that it's not going to be that way. And I think the kids are losing a lot of days, whether it's pushed to the end or half days. And I know there are Illinois state requirements on how many school days we have, and a half day counts, but that's the administration's issue. A half day doesn't count to me. And so this is more of a statement going forward. I would like this given a lot more discussion amongst the board with the administration for next year's calendar, because I think there's a lot of room for improvement. It can dovetail with, I know we're looking at bigger picture issues like the high school completely changing the calendar year, and we're looking at maybe matching it or going halfway. So that's great, and we could mix it in with that, but I think there are more issues than that.
That's a key issue, and I remind us that right now we do have a 2014-15 calendar that is set. That's not to say that we couldn't revisit it, but we're working now on the 2015-16 calendar, and that's where the high school is proposing their major change. But to your point, the 2014-15 is on the books, and some are planning vacations around that, so we should look at that if the board would like.
So I'm gonna piggyback on Rick, and this will be my last formal statement of the night. I'm not in favor of the revised calendar, and it would be easy to say that it's about May 23rd, which could be turned into a full day and provide a higher educational experience that day, but that would be an incorrect way of looking at my vote. My issue isn't with May 23rd in particular. In fact, I actually don't think it's the board's role to get involved in that specific of scheduling. I think that is an ops issue which belongs to the admin. I very much, and this is echoing some of the things Rick just said, I very much think it is the board's role to provide the administration the philosophy and the direction with regards to scheduling, and that's my issue, which is a lot bigger than May 23rd. In January, we had 4 emergency days off for everybody. Nobody wanted them, nobody asked for them. It was unavoidable act of nature. Between January and June, our school calendar contained a total of 4 half-days and 6 full days off of school, not including spring break. So keeping spring break aside, that's 10 days where we could have made up for the lost emergency days, 10 opportunities. Each of these days had some reason. Some were holidays, some were professional development days, some were conference days, some were religious days, some had other reasons. A number of board members, including myself, encouraged the administration to work with the union to not just add the emergency days at the end of the school year, but rather use some of the already scheduled days off to replace those emergency days. And while, as Rick said, turning a half day into a full day doesn't do anything towards meeting state minimum requirements, that's not my objective. My objective is to give the kids the best possible education. Half days don't give the kids the best education. Rescheduling school days in mid-June also don't give the kids the best education. To be fair, the administration and the teachers union did agree to convert April 17th from a half day to a full day, and in my mind, that absolutely got one of the 4 emergency days back. The state doesn't view it that way, but from the kids' perspective, that became a quality day. There's still 3 other days that need to be made up. Yes, doing so earlier than June, not adding them on in June, would cause inconvenience for someone, for parents, for teachers, for staff, but the kids' education needs to be the first priority. We talked about this at the February board meeting, and a statement was made that when scheduling in June, everything just gets pushed back. That's really not a true statement. As Rob pointed out, most literally, the 8th grade graduation date does not get moved back, so our 8th graders literally lost 3 days. Beyond the 8th graders, scheduling days in June simply is the less quality days, as Rick pointed out. That's just a simple reality. So this vote isn't about May 23rd, it's about expressing disappointment. For me, it's about expressing disappointment that we didn't better use the opportunity we had to get the kids the 4 days back in a high quality manner. And as I said, I understand there's a variety of considerations, parent vacation plans, union contract issues, professional development days, but in my mind, getting the kids the best education has to trump the other issues every time. Leslie mentioned earlier in her report a related issue, but it's related. The admin team is now talking about starting the 2015 school year earlier. I've counted the days next year. I've counted the new calendar, and I've come to realize that if we simply eliminate half days and reduce the numerous full days off that occur between Labor Day and Memorial Day, we can start the school year around Labor Day, as we currently do, and still achieve the objectives that the high school seems to have for us. It's a separate issue, but it's related, and I hope we do talk about that more. So in summary, I don't feel like we did everything we could to get the 4 emergency days back in a high quality manner for the 1,800 students in District 67. That's why I'm opposing the revised calendar. It's not about May 23rd, it's about an opportunity lost. I hope that all of us, the board, the administration, in collaboration with the teacher union, can do a better job of this going forward.
Thank you. I usually don't weigh in on these areas because it's not my area of expertise, but I'd just like to point out, you know, having gone to college in California, you can have meaningful school days in good weather. And it just seems to me like the smartest thing to do is add these days on in June and make them full days rather than to have people come into school on Good Friday or, you know, some religious holiday or something. So just my 2 cents. Are there other questions or comments from board members?
I really do see where Rick and Mike are coming from, and I would love to be more creative in planning as we move forward. And as Andy said, we've already set the calendar for next year, but we can look at days as we move forward, and I would support that. What I would say, though, and it's everywhere, it's in our vision, it's in every discussion that we have, we want excellent teachers. They need job-embedded, timely training. And that, to me, is what May 23rd is about. And if we want the quality to be translated to our kids, we can't do it without properly training our teachers.
Are they, what professional development is occurring on May 23rd?
May 23rd is one of the records days that we have worked out with the union. It's been a decade-long practice for them to have the additional time to get ready for report cards.
So to be clear, it's not professional development?
Not that day.
They won't be articulating with one another?
Yes, they will. You know, anytime you've got a shared report card, certainly, especially at the middle school, they'll be working together, special ed teachers with regular ed teachers, the fine arts group that, you know, share the 7-week schedules, things like that. Yeah.
And if I recall, I may be misspeaking here, but if I recall, typically, historically in the past, that last records day, if you go back to the latter part of May, was also meant for kids transitioning from the elementary schools, going to the middle schools to deal with placement and perhaps talking with teachers there. I don't know if they typically do that anymore. That was a practice they did in the past.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Ms. Fisher.
I'll just quickly say I agree with almost everything that Rick and Mike said, maybe everything. And I think certainly for whatever the next contract year is that we haven't got things planned for, we need to change this. We might even want to visit next year's schedule.
That was going to be my question. Have maybe I missed it or maybe I don't remember. Have we formally approved next year's schedule as a board? I don't believe we have either.
I believe
Has the board approved it?
I believe we have, but I'm not certain.
So there's a lot of doubt whether we have or not, but I guess I would ask the superintendent, can we, I guess, can you take this feedback and revisit next year's calendar with understanding what you've heard tonight?
Yeah, I mean, it's not as cut and dried as it might appear. I'll give one, you know, really clear and recent example of it. The results we saw from Bridges earlier today, this evening, that's a result of ongoing real-time, job-embedded professional development. And you know, we are sensitive to, hey, how are we using late start days? How are we using half days? When you start a program up that is as difficult as that one is to implement, it does require a different kind of engagement. And so what you're going to see from the administration more rather than less frequently is a push for that kind of for late starts. I'd use Barry Rogers at the high school as an example. They had a late start every single Wednesday, and that's the highest performing school in the state. And there was sound reason for that, and it was rooted in collaborative teacher practices. And so and I'm not saying that I'm a fan of half days. We went from 18 half days in my last life down to 3 as a result of parental encouragement to do so. But we also had late starts on an ongoing basis, and the message that we've got is we'll hold our nose on late starts as long as the administration demonstrates, hey, this is the value that is being added for those. And what we would show for this year's late starts, the value that we would demonstrate would be the earlier bridges, the results of that. That's the kind of thing that we want to encourage more of rather than less of it. Another point on the school calendar, I called local religious leaders about whether or not we should have school on Good Friday or not, and there was very, very pointed feedback from them. Look, we have a lot of observant families in our community, and this is something that's important to them. So it's, their view is it's bad enough that you have school on Easter Monday, where a lot of families travel. That's not a religious holiday, so we'll give you a bye on that one. But Good Friday, there are a lot of kids that come to school with ashes on their foreheads. And, so that's something that, in creating a calendar, that's something that we want to be mindful of. So adding a day like that, if we have a snow day, you start to run into other important things, and in families' opinions, more important things than a school day. So there are occasions where you say, hey, look, that day in June is preferable to adding through the contract, changing it mid-course like that. We're not fans of adding days on at the end of the year, but I think there are times when I think we'd all look at each other and say, yeah, this is a good use of time. And so if we want to take Ed Committee perhaps and look at the calendar there, that might be the venue to do it, because the issue that is being advocated here is really an instructional issue. That's the interest, and there's no debate about wanting a great educational experience for kids. There is some ongoing debate about, hey, how good are half days? How good are late start days? And if they are good, where's the proof? So but I think what we're gonna see from Lori and Lauren is a lot more, hey, we've got cool stuff and we want to get people to do it. And that's exactly what we want from these guys. So maybe Ed Committee, the next Ed Committee would be a good time to put that on the calendar.
I will put it on the agenda for this summer, actually.
Okay. Does that sound like?
Let me just say for the Catholics in the audience, we didn't just add Ash Wednesday as a as a school holiday.
Well, yeah, I agree with Bill. I personally don't think there's a huge issue of adding some days in June. I mean, the weather's not that great at that stage of the game. But I think there is a need to reinvestigate what I think there's a perception in the parent community of days that go wasted, particularly when it comes to parent-teacher conferences. When you're in the elementary schools, most, if not all, teachers plan them the week before. And then in the middle school, I think I've gotten a note every year for my older kids saying, hey, your child doesn't need a conference. Oh, they don't. Okay, well, that's great, but then we've got a day and a half set aside for parent-teacher conferences, and everybody I've talked to is saying their teacher's recommending you don't need a conference. So what the hell what's going on for those day and a half? It could be utilized very effectively. I'm just saying there's a perception, though, when that happens, that those are days off. So we either need to change the way we go about scheduling those 2 days or eliminate them.
Mr. Simic, there is one thing about the calendar. There are certain dates that they have to be approved by with regard to the Regional Office of Education. And this calendar for 14-15 was approved, or Jen just checked it, in April 2013.
April 23rd.
We were here. You too, Rick.
What was the comment?
Calendars are approved 2 years in advance.
We approved this one on April 23rd, 13.
Yeah, it's according to it's a requirement from the Regional Office of Education.
You know what? Now I sort of remember this, and it's why it never gets discussed, because every time I when the board brings this up, well, it's already approved. We're already looking at 2 years ahead, but it never gets discussed.
But just like this calendar, it can be amended before the end of the year, Just like we're amending our calendar this year, we could amend the calendar for next year.
Are we going to do last year, I think it was in May, when we approved late starts for that school year, we said we were going to come back at the end of the school year with an understanding of were they effective, did they work, should we continue them? Is that going to be done next month?
Yes.
No, I didn't expect it.
Mike and Bill, I guess, an agenda item. I know that the calendar next year said we look at the Ed Committee. Mike, you're starting to vet the idea, as you said, for the 15-16 and the alignment with the high school and all of that. And you're going out to parent groups, which I think is fantastic. Can we formally have an agenda item, whether it's a board meeting or a workshop, but can we have that discussion as well before you go a whole lot further on that?
I would say that we got some feedback last time. It's not far enough along to bring back really a good recommendation at this point. So the high school is going to completely revisit what they proposed, and we're just really waiting for feedback from them on, hey, this is the direction that we're going. So we won't have a lot to say yet. I'd rather go out and see what our parent group is saying, so we can bring that back and say, hey, this is the general feedback that we have. What's the pleasure of the board? Where would you like to go with that?
Mike, as I just pointed out, I mean, we have these kids for 9 years, and they have them for 4, and I think that's relevant when you think about when to start. I mean, it's more important, more years in District 67, and I've had kids in the high. I try not to talk about my family, but I've had kids in the high school who were athletes and who were not athletes, and the athletes go back early and the others don't, and it's just kind of the way it is. And the ones at 67 go back when they go back. I don't really think they need to be that linked, personally.
It was one of these funny things where, there's, hey, we're interested in starting school earlier, and then brought it back. The feedback we got from the high school was, why on earth would you bring this to us? I said, well, a couple months ago you suggested that you might want us to bring it to you. So, well, don't do that again. So, I mean, it did not meet with a really warm reception. So, so there's going to be some pretty significant tweaking there. So I'd say give us, maybe another month to kick that around, and then we'll put something out and say it's starting to gel a little bit, because right now it's not gelling. What we got from the elementary was 2 weeks early. Absolutely, don't even consider it. If you want to move it up some, yeah, maybe, but we don't have to align with the high school either. That's really clear.
And I think, and this will be my final comment of the night, Leslie mentioned professional development. I'm 100% with professional development. You and I, as well as Bill, have talked about other creative ways of doing professional development. Might cost us some money, so be it, as well as during the year. But as Jeff mentioned, there are other days that are not professional development that are perhaps not utilized. So it's relatively easy to point to say some of those days off are really well used. I'm not debating every single one of them. I think that there's enough that are not well used. You could start on Labor Day and still achieve your objectives. And
All right. Could I have a motion to approve the 2013-14 final calendar?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Could I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Borkowski?
no, thank you.
Sorry, put it in the wrong column there. Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Nay.
Mr. Folker?
Yes, please.
Motion carries.
Mr. Anderson, could I have one last comment?
Oh, absolutely, Dr. Hendrickson.
Paul Saminsky, who has been leading up the charge of trying to coordinate with the high school and put the calendar together through APT representation and teachers, they just had a baby, their first. He wrote tonight, say, Madeline Christina Saminsky at 4:43 p.m., 7 pounds, 14 ounces, 20 inches. Baby is perfect, mom is incredible. So I thought that was...
Congratulations, that's great. The next item on the agenda is approval of proposed board meeting dates for 2014-15. We won't be having any late starts. But it's not intentionally. Let me see here. Is there discussion on this, or?
I like the calendar
Yes.
very
Oh.
much.
I have discussion on this, and maybe I should have brought this up beforehand. But when I look at Tuesday, July 28th, that concerns me, that a lot of people wait until that week to go away. Myself, I wait until I can say I won't be here. I think it's something to think about. Does that stand out to anyone else?
Yeah, I would support that as a revisiting, yeah.
I do.
That last
do you
weekend, that
recall
last week in July.
Last year we ran into a problem.
The last week in July is yes, popular time based on travel schedules. I mean, you've got travel baseball, you've got travel field hockey, you've got travel soccer, and they all go till that last weekend in July. So this would be the time when a lot of us, especially those of us have to get back for high school sports, it's the only week available.
I won't be available a week earlier, but that's it's my wife's birthday. Not available on July 15th, no. What's the date we're talking about? That sounds good. I'm okay with that.
If you notice, there is one in December that's on a Monday, if that's okay with everybody, due to religious holidays. Monday, December 15th. I don't know if anybody had noticed that prior to tonight. Monday, one meeting is on Monday, December 15th.
By me.
So I will change officially the last meeting of the year to Tuesday, July 21st, 2015.
2015 will be
Yeah.
changed to the 21st, and then we can vote to approve it as modified.
Yes.
And Eileen, could you do us the favor? Could you send us the new revised calendar? Thank you.
Will be published in the newspaper as well, once this is over and
Thus
and
my
on the
request for an
webpage
email.
and-
Can you sync it to my phone or something? Okay. May I have a motion to approve the proposed board meeting dates as amended for 2014-15 school year?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Eileen?
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Falker?
Yes.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is item K, approval of resolution authorizing honorable dismissal of teachers. Mr. Simic.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So item K, L, and M and N are all similar. Is there any further comment that we need on these, Dr. Henriksen? No? Okay, so much of it was discussed in closed session, and so I recommend approving these as presented. I think you probably need an individual vote on each of them.
We have to do them individually.
I believe, yes.
May I have a motion to approve the resolution authorizing honorable dismissal of teachers in item K?
So moved.
May I have a second? May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Motion carries.
The next item is item L, approval of resolution authorizing honorable dismissal of part-time, non-tenured teachers. This was also discussed in closed session. If there's no discussion, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
I abstain.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Next item is item M, approval of resolution authorizing non-reemployment of full-time first, second, and third year non-tenured teachers. This was discussed in closed session. May I have a motion to approve item M?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next is item N, approval of resolution authorizing non-reemployment of part-time, non-tenured teacher. This was discussed in closed session. If there's no discussion, may I have a motion to approve item N?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. The next item is item O, approval of Assistant Superintendent of Growth, Talent Development, and Human Relations multi-year contract. This was also discussed in closed session. Is there any discussion? Seeing none.
Who is, no.
Sorry. Who were they? Who was it? Don't do it. May I have a motion to approve item O, please?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Big yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Next item is item P, approval of human resources items, hiring, resignations, terminations, family and medical leave absence, and change in status. May I have a motion to approve the human resources items?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next item is the consent agenda, which includes approval of disbursements, payrolls, and financial statements for March 2014, minutes of a regular meeting, March 18th, 2014, minutes of an executive session, March 18th, 2014, minutes of a board workshop, April 1st, 2014, and disposal of audio recordings from July 24th, August 20th, and August 27th, 2012. Are there any items which a board member would like removed from the consent agenda for further discussion? Hearing none. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Folker?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Borkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We have FOIA requests from I'm assuming it's a Mr. Lenny Jarrett of Education Matters. Announcements. Friday, May 23rd will be a school improvement day, 1/2 day. We'll skip over that. Monday, May 26, 2014 is Memorial Day. There will be no school. Tuesday, May 27, 2014 is a Board of Education meeting. That's us, 7 p.m., Lake Forest High School West Campus. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. The meeting is adjourned.